They were about to bury her alive. Evelyn Cross, tech billionaire, philanthropist, the woman who'd built empires from nothing, was about to be lowered 6 feet under while her heart still beat. The mourners didn't know. The priest didn't know. Only 3 people knew the truth. The husband who'd orchestrated it, the doctor who'd helped him, and the janitor who was about to ruin everything. What happened next would expose the darkest betrayal money could buy and prove that sometimes the people society overlooks are the only ones brave enough to see the truth. Stay with me until the end. Hit that like button. Comment your city below. I want to see how far this story travels. The November sky hung low and gray over Riverside Memorial Cemetery, pressing down on the mourners like a held breath. Evelyn Cross's funeral was supposed to be a quiet affair, or at least that's what Marcus Cross had told the press. She wanted intimacy in death, he'd said, dabbing at dry eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. Just close friends and family. But there was nothing intimate about the circus that had assembled by Grave Plot 447. News vans lined the narrow cemetery road, their satellite dishes reaching toward the clouds like mechanical flowers. Reporters pressed against the velvet ropes that security had hastily erected, their cameras trained on the sleek black casket that cost more than most people's houses. The very presence of Evelyn Cross, even in death, commanded attention. At 43, she'd been worth an estimated $7 billion. The founder and CEO of Helix Technologies, a company that had revolutionized data encryption and made her one of the most powerful women in Silicon Valley. Now she was gone. A sudden cardiac event, the family physician had announced. Tragic. Unexpected. These things happen. Marcus Cross stood at the head of the casket, his tall frame draped in a perfectly tailored black suit that probably cost more than the average car. His silver-touched hair was swept back just so, his face arranged in an expression of dignified grief that would photograph well. He'd been practicing that expression for weeks. "We gather here today," began Reverend Mitchell, an elderly man with kind eyes who'd never actually met Evelyn Cross, "to celebrate the life of a remarkable woman." The Reverend's voice droned on, but Marcus wasn't listening. He was counting the minutes until this charade was over. Counting the days until the insurance payout cleared, counting the weeks until he'd have complete control of Helix Technologies and everything Evelyn had built. She'd been so careful, so meticulous about her will, about succession plans, about keeping him at arm's length from the real power. But dead wives don't sign contracts. Dead wives don't contest decisions. Dead wives don't divorce you and take half of everything. A pioneer in her field, a generous philanthropist, a loving wife. That last part almost made Marcus smile. Loving wife. If only they knew. If only they'd seen the papers she'd been planning to file. The divorce attorneys she'd been meeting with. The forensic accountants she'd hired to dig through his offshore accounts. Evelyn had been 3 days away from destroying him. Now she was 3 minutes away from being underground forever. Dr. Harrison Webb stood slightly apart from the main group of mourners, his medical bag clutched tightly in his weathered hands. He was 61 years old, a respected physician who'd served wealthy families for decades, and his conscience was eating him alive. Every few seconds, his eyes darted to the casket, then away, then back again. His palms were sweating despite the November chill. It had seemed so simple when Marcus first approached him. A mild sedative, Marcus had said, just something to help her sleep. She's been under so much stress. And Dr. Webb had written the prescription without question, because that's what you did for families like the Crosses. You didn't ask, you didn't probe, you helped. The second prescription had been stranger, a beta blocker, unusually strong. For her heart palpitations, Marcus had explained. Doctor. Webb had hesitated that time, but Marcus had smiled that charming smile of his and mentioned how much he appreciated the doctor's discretion, and how loyal patients were hard to find, and how it would be a shame if certain medical board complaints from years ago were to resurface. The third compound hadn't even had a name on the bottle. "What is this?" Dr. Webb had asked, staring at the clear liquid. "Does it matter?" Marcus had replied. "You've already helped this much. What's one more prescription? Think of it as insurance. For both of us." And God help him, Dr. Webb had administered it. He'd watched Evelyn's pulse slow to nearly nothing, watched her skin turn cold and waxy, watched her pupils become fixed and dilated. He'd pronounced her dead at 11:47 p.m. the previous night, signed the death certificate, and arranged for the body to be released to the funeral home immediately. No autopsy, no questions. Rush the burial, Marcus had insisted. It's what she would have wanted. Now, standing in the cemetery with his soul withering inside him, Dr. Webb understood exactly what they'd done. And he understood that in about 2 minutes, when they lowered that casket into the ground, he would become a murderer. His hand trembled as it moved toward his jacket pocket. Inside was a syringe, a counteragent. He'd prepared it this morning, just in case. Just in case his courage finally manifested. Just in case he could find a way to... Harrison. Dr. Webb flinched. Marcus had moved beside him, silent as a cat. You look pale, Marcus murmured, his voice low enough that no one else could hear. Perhaps you should step back. Get some air. This must be very difficult for you, losing such a long-time patient. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a warning. Dr. Webb's hand fell away from his pocket. He nodded mutely and stepped back into the shadows of the gathering, hating himself with every breath. The Reverend concluded his remarks with a solemn prayer. On cue, the cemetery workers moved forward to prepare the lowering mechanism, a hydraulic system that would gently, smoothly lower the casket into the ground. It was all very dignified, very peaceful. The casket began its descent. Inside the polished mahogany box, in the darkness, Evelyn Cross's heart beat 14 times per minute. Her lungs drew breath every 45 seconds, barely enough to sustain life, but enough. Her mind floated in a gray space between consciousness and oblivion, aware of nothing except the suffocating sensation of being trapped, buried, erased. In her semi-conscious state, she couldn't scream, couldn't move, couldn't signal that she was still alive, still fighting, still there. The casket descended another 6 inches. Marcus allowed himself a small, private smile. That's when Aaron Cole came running. He burst from the maintenance shed like a man possessed, his janitor's coveralls stained with grass and dirt, his gray hair wild around his weathered face. At 63 years old, Aaron had worked at Riverside Memorial for 7 years, maintaining the grounds, cleaning the chapel, and staying invisible exactly the way he liked it. He'd learned long ago that invisibility was a kind of safety. When people didn't see you, they couldn't hurt you, couldn't take from you, couldn't destroy everything you loved. But sometimes, invisibility meant you saw things you weren't supposed to see. Stop! Aaron's voice cracked across the cemetery like a whip. Stop the burial! She's not dead! 300 heads turned in unison. The hydraulic lowering system paused with a mechanical whine. Marcus's smile vanished, replaced by an expression of shocked outrage so perfect it should have won an Oscar. What the hell is this? Marcus demanded, his voice carrying the exact right note of grieving husband interrupted. Security! Someone remove this man immediately! 2 security guards, hired by Marcus specifically for their intimidating size and lack of curiosity, moved toward Aaron, but Aaron was already pushing through the crowd, his eyes locked on the casket with desperate intensity. I heard them, Aaron shouted, stumbling over a flower arrangement but catching himself. 2 nights ago, I heard them planning this. Mr. Cross and the doctor, they're trying to bury her alive. The crowd erupted. Gasps, shouts, the clicking of cameras going into overdrive. Reporters surged forward, nearly toppling the velvet ropes. This was no longer just a billionaire's funeral. This was a story. This man is clearly disturbed, Marcus announced, his voice rising above the chaos with practiced authority. He's a cemetery employee who's had issues in the past. Security, please escort him away so we can continue honoring my wife's memory with the dignity she deserves. The guards grabbed Aaron's arms, but Aaron planted his feet and refused to move. He might have been 63 and lean as a rail, but desperation gave him strength. Check her pulse, Aaron yelled, his voice raw. For God's sake, just check her pulse. She's been given something, some kind of drug that mimics death. I heard them talking about it in the funeral home office 2 nights ago when I was cleaning. Mr. Cross said she'd be out for at least 48 hours, and the doctor said we need to bury her before she wakes up. Those were his exact words. Dr. Webb had gone white as chalk. His medical bag slipped from his fingers and hit the ground with a thud. Marcus, however, remained perfectly composed. This is absurd. This man is clearly having some kind of breakdown. My wife was examined by a licensed physician. He gestured toward Dr. Webb and pronounced dead over 12 hours ago. This is nothing but a pathetic attempt at what? Attention? Money? I want him arrested for disturbing the peace and then prove me wrong, Aaron interrupted, his voice suddenly calm, eerily calm. He stopped struggling against the guards and instead looked directly at Marcus with eyes that had seen too much loss in their time. If I'm crazy, if I'm lying, if this is all just some delusion, then proving me wrong should be simple. Open the casket, check her vitals. If she's truly dead, I'll leave quietly. I'll never work in this city again. I'll accept whatever consequences you want to impose. The silence that followed was absolute. But if I'm right, Aaron continued softly, and you refuse to check, then everyone here will know exactly what that means. 300 people held their breath. 300 phones recorded every second. The reporters pressed closer, sensing blood in the water. Marcus's jaw clenched. This wasn't in the plan. The janitor wasn't supposed to. How the hell had a maintenance worker been in the funeral home office 2 nights ago? Marcus had been so careful. He'd checked the place himself before having that conversation with Dr. Webb. The cleaning staff wasn't supposed to come until Thursday, but Marcus Cross hadn't built his reputation or his wife's fortune, which he'd helped manage, by panicking in crisis moments. His mind raced through scenarios, possibilities, exits. If he refused to open the casket, the media would crucify him. The speculation alone would be enough to trigger investigations. Insurance companies didn't pay out on suspicious deaths. The board at Helix Technologies would freeze all succession plans. Everything would unravel. But if he opened the casket and Evelyn was truly dead, and she should be, the drug should have kept her under for at least another 6 hours, according to Dr. Webb's calculations. Then this janitor would be exposed as a lunatic, and Marcus could proceed with burying his wife with even more public sympathy than before. The calculation took 3 seconds. Fine, Marcus said coldly. Open it. Let's put this insanity to rest. He gestured to the funeral director, a nervous man named Patterson who looked like he wanted to disappear into the earth himself. Patterson hesitated, looking between Marcus and Aaron and the crowd and the cameras. Mr. Cross, this is highly irregular. Open the casket. Marcus's voice could have frozen nitrogen. Patterson nodded to his assistants. Together they moved to the lowering mechanism and began raising the casket back up to ground level. The hydraulics whined in protest, as if the machinery itself knew this was wrong. Aaron finally stopped struggling. The security guards loosened their grip slightly but didn't release him. Dr. Webb stood frozen, his face the color of old newspaper. Marcus positioned himself at the head of the casket, his expression now one of sorrowful indulgence. See how patient I am with this madman, even in my moment of grief. He was already planning his follow-up statement to the press. Patterson and his assistants unfastened the casket locks. The seals released with small hissing sounds. Slowly, with the reverence trained into them by years of handling the dead, they lifted the casket lid. Evelyn Cross lay perfectly still in white silk, her hands folded across her chest, her face made up to look peaceful in death. She was a beautiful woman, had been a beautiful woman, with sharp, intelligent features and dark hair that fell in waves around her pale face. The mortician had done excellent work. She looked exactly like a person who had died of natural causes. Patterson leaned in cautiously, professional to the last. He placed 2 fingers against Evelyn's throat, feeling for the carotid artery. He waited, frowned, adjusted his fingers, waited again. "There's no pulse," he announced. "I'm sorry, but this woman is—" "Check her wrist," Aaron interrupted. "The radial artery. The drug they use slows the heart rate to almost nothing. You need to check for at least 30 seconds. Patterson looked to Marcus, who gave a curt nod. "See how accommodating I am?" The funeral director took Evelyn's wrist gently and pressed his fingers against the inside of her arm. He stared at his watch, counting. The crowd was so quiet you could hear the distant sound of traffic on the highway. 10 seconds. Nothing. Marcus began to relax. 20 seconds. Still nothing. Dr. Webb's hand crept back toward his jacket pocket. 25 seconds. Patterson's eyes widened. "Wait," he whispered. "Wait, I think—" He grabbed his stethoscope from his assistant and pressed it to Evelyn's chest, right over her heart. His face went from professional calm to shock in the space of a heartbeat. Her heartbeat. "Oh my God," Patterson breathed. "Oh my God, there's a pulse. It's slow, impossibly slow, but it's there. She's alive, she's alive." The crowd exploded. Reporters screamed questions. Mourners gasped and shrieked. Someone fainted, or pretended to for the cameras. Security tried and failed to maintain any kind of order. The scene descended into beautiful, perfect chaos. And in that chaos, several things happened simultaneously. Aaron Cole broke free from the distracted security guards and ran to the casket. From his coveralls, he pulled a small vial, something he'd been carrying for 2 days, ever since he'd overheard that terrible conversation and spent every waking hour researching, calling in old favors, finding someone who could tell him what drug might cause death-like symptoms and what might reverse it. Dr. Webb finally found his courage. He pushed through the crowd, pulling out his own syringe, the counteragent he'd prepared that morning. Marcus Cross stood frozen for exactly 2 seconds. 2 seconds where his mask slipped and pure cold rage showed through. Then his instincts took over and he lunged toward the casket, toward Evelyn, toward stopping whatever these men were about to do. "Don't let them touch her," Marcus screamed. "They're trying to poison her. Security! Security!" But the security guards were overwhelmed by the surging crowd. Reporters and mourners alike pushed forward, everyone wanting to see, to witness, to record this impossible moment. Aaron reached the casket first. His hand shook as he uncapped the vial. It contained atropine, a drug that increases heart rate and counteracts certain types of poisoning. He'd spent his last $200 getting it from a veterinary supplier who didn't ask too many questions. He had no idea if it would work, no idea if the dosage was right, no idea if he was about to kill Evelyn Cross himself. But he knew that doing nothing would definitely kill her. "Forgive me if I'm wrong," Aaron whispered, and tilted Evelyn's head back gently. He placed 3 drops under her tongue. "No!" Marcus had fought his way to the casket's edge. He grabbed Aaron's wrist, and the vial went flying into the crowd. Dr. Webb caught it, purely by reflex, years of quick hands in emergency rooms paying off. He stared at the vial, at Aaron, at Evelyn's still face, at Marcus's expression of rage, and he made his choice. "Hold him," Dr. Webb said quietly to the nearest mourners. Whether they understood what was happening or just reacted to the authority in his voice, 3 men grabbed Marcus and pulled him back. Marcus fought like a wild animal, screaming about lawsuits and arrests and how they were all witnesses to assault. Dr. Webb administered his own syringe, a more precise counteragent, professionally prepared, the exact antidote to what he'd helped poison Evelyn with in the first place. He injected it directly into her IV port. Marcus had insisted she keep the port in for appearance's sake, which now made terrible sense. Then Aaron and Dr. Webb and Patterson and 300 other people waited. 5 seconds. Nothing. Evelyn lay still and pale and perfect in her casket, looking exactly as dead as she had 5 minutes ago. 10 seconds. Marcus had stopped struggling and was now watching with an expression of desperate hope, hope that she wouldn't wake, that this wouldn't work, that his plan could still succeed. 15 seconds. Aaron felt his heart sinking. He'd been wrong. He'd made a terrible mistake. He'd assaulted a dead woman and disrupted a funeral and destroyed his own life for nothing, for a conversation he'd misunderstood, for... Evelyn's chest hitched. It was subtle, barely visible, but Patterson, who had his stethoscope still pressed to her ribs, heard it clearly. A deeper breath. Then another. Her heart rate was increasing, climbing from 14 beats per minute to 18 to 22 to 30. "It's working," Patterson whispered. "Dear God, it's working." Evelyn's fingers twitched. Her eyelids fluttered, but didn't open. Not yet. Her skin began to lose that waxy death-pale quality, blood starting to flow more freely through her system. Color returned to her lips. The crowd noise had faded to an eerie silence. Everyone was watching. Everyone was recording. This wasn't just news. This was history. Marcus made one last desperate lunge toward the casket. Aaron didn't think, didn't plan. He just moved. 63 years old, no combat training, nothing but instinct, and he put himself between Marcus Cross and the woman who was being born back into life. Don't, Aaron said simply. Marcus looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time. Saw a man with gray hair and cheap coveralls and eyes that had witnessed loss so profound it had carved canyons in his soul. Saw someone who had nothing left to lose and therefore nothing to fear. You don't understand, Marcus hissed. You can't possibly understand what you've... I understand exactly what I've done, Aaron interrupted. I've stopped a murder, just like I couldn't stop one 7 years ago. Something in Aaron's voice made Marcus take a step back, and in that moment of hesitation, Evelyn Cross opened her eyes. She stared up at the November sky, confused and frightened and alive. Her mouth moved, but no sound came out. Her hand rose slowly, trembling, to touch her own face, as if confirming she was real, was present, was here. Mrs. Cross? Patterson said gently, his professional training taking over. Mrs. Cross, you're safe. You're at your funeral, but you're safe now. Can you hear me? Blink once for yes. Evelyn blinked. Once. Then her eyes tracked slowly across the crowd until they landed on Marcus. And in that moment, everyone present saw something that no amount of acting could fake. They saw recognition. They saw understanding. They saw absolute bone-deep terror. Evelyn's mouth opened, and this time, sound came out. A raw, broken scream that spoke of betrayal and horror and the terrible knowledge of what had nearly happened to her. He tried to kill me, she rasped, her voice barely human after so many hours of chemically induced paralysis. My husband tried to kill me. The cameras caught every word. Every news network would play that clip on repeat for months. But in the moment, there was only shocked silence as the implications settled over the cemetery like nuclear fallout. Marcus's face went through a fascinating transformation. Shock, denial, calculation, fear, rage, and finally, a desperate attempt at damage control. She's confused, he said quickly, looking around at the crowd with wide, pleading eyes. She's been through trauma. She doesn't know what she's saying. Evelyn, honey, I would never... I love you. You're just disoriented from whatever drug this madman gave you. You were there, Evelyn whispered, her eyes locked on Marcus even as two paramedics, materialized from God knows where, rushed to her side with a stretcher. In my hospital room 3 weeks ago, when they said I had stress-induced cardiac symptoms. You brought me water, you smiled, and you said... Her voice broke. You said you'd take care of everything. The paramedics were checking her vitals, establishing an IV line, doing all the things that skilled medical professionals do. But they were also listening. Everyone was listening. The water? Evelyn continued, her voice getting stronger as her heart rate climbed toward normal. It tasted bitter. I thought it was just the hospital cups. But it was you. It was always you. Marcus opened his mouth to deny, to deflect, to do what he'd always done and talk his way out of trouble. But Dr. Webb spoke first. She's right, the doctor said quietly. His voice was steady despite the tears running down his weathered face. I helped him. God forgive me. I helped him. The sedatives, the beta blockers, the final compound, I provided all of it. I pronounced her dead when I knew she was only chemically sedated. I rushed the burial to avoid an autopsy. I'm a murderer, or I would have been, if not for this man. He gestured to Aaron, who stood silent and still, looking like he might collapse at any moment. The police arrived then. Someone had called 911 at some point in the chaos, though no one could later remember who. Officers Rivera and Chen would never forget this call. Domestic disturbance at a funeral turned into attempted murder of a billionaire. This was career-defining stuff. Marcus Cross, Officer Rivera began, approaching slowly because Marcus looked like a cornered animal, and those were always the most dangerous kind. I need you to come with us and answer some questions. Marcus ran. It was the stupidest thing he could have done, but panic makes people stupid. He bolted toward the cemetery's edge, toward the parking lot, toward his car and escape, and maybe, just maybe, a flight to a non-extradition country. He made it 12 feet before 3 reporters tackled him. The footage would go viral within the hour. As police handcuffed both Marcus and the sobbing Dr. Webb, as paramedics loaded Evelyn onto a stretcher to rush her to the hospital, as the crowd slowly began to process what they'd just witnessed, Aaron Cole quietly sat down on someone's gravestone and put his head in his hands. His whole body was shaking, adrenaline crash probably, or maybe just the weight of what had almost happened, what he'd almost failed to prevent. A hand touched his shoulder gently. Aaron looked up to find Evelyn being held by the paramedics at her insistence. She'd asked them to wait, just for a moment. "You saved my life," she said simply. Her voice was raspy but clear. Her eyes were focused despite everything her body had been through. "You didn't know me. You had no reason to help. Why?" Aaron was quiet for a long moment, staring at his weathered hands. Hands that had buried so many people over the past 7 years. Hands that had finally saved one. 7 years ago, he said softly, I was a paramedic, best in my district. I had a wife, Sophie, and a daughter, Maya. She was 16. Beautiful girl. Smart as they come. His voice caught, but he pushed through. There was a man, Richard Fenton, rich guy, influential. He was abusing his wife. Everyone knew, the police knew, the neighbors knew. I knew because I'd responded to 3 accidents at their house. But he was connected. Nothing ever stuck. And his wife was too scared to testify. Aaron's hands clenched into fists. I told myself it wasn't my problem, that I'd done my part by reporting it, that someone else would handle it. And then one day, Richard Fenton snapped, killed his wife, and then went after the neighbor who'd called the police. That neighbor was my daughter. Maya was walking past their house on her way home from school. Wrong place, wrong time. The cemetery was silent. Even the reporters had stopped shoving microphones forward. Sophie couldn't live with the grief, Aaron continued, took pills 6 months later. And I quit the paramedics because I couldn't save people anymore without seeing Maya in every patient, Sophie in every loss. I became a janitor because invisible people don't have to make choices, don't have to decide whether to get involved, don't have to live with the consequences of doing nothing. He looked up at Evelyn, his eyes bright with unshed tears. But I heard your husband planning to kill you, and I had a choice. Stay invisible and safe. Or remember what it cost me the last time I chose safety over action. So I chose you. I chose to see. And this time, thank God, this time it was enough. Evelyn was crying openly now, though whether from relief or emotion or just the after effects of the drugs in her system, no one could say. She reached out and took Aaron's hand in both of hers. Thank you, she whispered, for seeing, for caring, for being brave enough to save a stranger. Thank you for living, Aaron replied. The paramedics couldn't wait any longer. Evelyn needed a hospital, needed proper medical care, needed to be monitored as the drugs worked their way out of her system. They loaded her into the ambulance gently, and as the doors closed, Aaron heard her give them very specific instructions. Don't let my husband anywhere near me. Don't let Dr. Webb near me. But find the janitor, Aaron Cole. Make sure he's taken care of. Whatever he needs, medical attention, legal help, anything. You make sure he gets it. The ambulance pulled away, sirens wailing, carrying a woman who'd been pronounced dead 12 hours ago toward whatever came next. Aaron sat alone on the gravestone and watched the chaos slowly organize itself around him. Police were establishing a perimeter, treating the cemetery as a crime scene. Reporters were doing stand-ups, speaking in breathless tones about the funeral that wasn't and the attempted murder that failed. Mourners were being interviewed, their shock and horror documented for posterity. And somewhere in all of that, Detective Sarah Park arrived and found Aaron sitting quietly amid the chaos, looking like a man who'd just run a marathon he hadn't trained for. Mr. Cole? She asked, approaching carefully. I'm Detective Park. I'm going to need you to come down to the station and give a statement about what you witnessed, and she paused, choosing her words carefully. What you did here today. Aaron nodded. He stood slowly, feeling every one of his 63 years. Am I under arrest? He asked quietly. For assault? Or disrupting a funeral? Or... No, Detective Park said firmly. You're being treated as a witness, possibly a hero depending on what the investigation reveals, but Mr. Cole... She waited until he met her eyes. What you overheard 2 nights ago is going to be the foundation of our case against Marcus Cross. I need you to remember everything, every word, every detail. Can you do that? Aaron thought about Maya, about Sophie, about 7 years of trying to forget, and finally having something worth remembering. Every word, he confirmed. I remember every word. As Detective Park led him toward her unmarked car, Aaron cast one last look at the grave plot that had almost become Evelyn Cross's eternal home. The casket still sat beside it, open to the November sky, empty white silk gleaming in the fading afternoon light. Plot 447 would remain empty. Its intended occupant was alive, heading toward answers and justice and whatever future she could build from the ashes of betrayal. And Aaron Cole, invisible janitor, was heading toward something too. He didn't know what yet. Didn't know how Evelyn's promise of taking care of him would manifest, or what the media storm would mean for his quiet life, or whether he'd ever be able to return to the safety of anonymity he'd wrapped around himself like armor. But for the first time in 7 years, Aaron thought he might be ready to be seen again. Behind him, cemetery maintenance supervisor Rodriguez stood shaking his head in disbelief. "Aaron," he muttered to no one in particular, "you magnificent bastard. You actually did it." The funeral home employees were carefully, respectfully lowering the casket back into its hearse. There would be no burial today, no closing of final chapters. Instead, there would be investigations and trials and the slow, painful excavation of truth. As Detective Park's car pulled away from Riverside Memorial Cemetery, as the news vans began their broadcast to the world, as Marcus Cross sat in the back of a police cruiser for the first time in his privileged life, one thing became absolutely clear. This funeral was just the beginning. The interrogation room at the 3rd Precinct smelled like stale coffee and decades of bad decisions. Aaron sat in a hard plastic chair across from Detective Sarah Park and her partner, Detective James Montgomery, a barrel-chested man with kind eyes who looked like he'd seen everything twice. A recording device sat between them, its red light blinking steadily. "Let's start from the beginning," Detective Park said, sliding a fresh cup of coffee toward Aaron. "You said you overheard a conversation 2 nights ago. Walk us through it, every detail." Aaron wrapped his hands around the cup, grateful for its warmth. Outside the small window, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Hours had passed since the cemetery, but it felt like minutes, or years. Time had become strange and elastic. "I work nights mostly," Aaron began, his voice rough. "The cemetery doesn't pay great, so I pick up extra shifts cleaning at Patterson's funeral home. Tuesday and Thursday nights, usually 11 to 3 in the morning. Nobody's there that late except me and sometimes Patterson himself, catching up on paperwork." Detective Montgomery nodded, taking notes. "And this was a Tuesday?" "Wednesday, actually, November 15th. I'd switched shifts with another cleaner because he had a family emergency." Aaron took a sip of coffee and grimaced. It was terrible, but it was hot. "I was mopping the administrative wing around 1:30 in the morning. The offices are supposed to be empty that late, but I heard voices coming from Patterson's private office. 2 men, talking low." "Did you recognize the voices?" Park asked. "Not at first. I almost left. Figured it was none of my business, but then one of them said something about the Cross funeral, and I stopped." Aaron's jaw tightened at the memory. Evelyn Cross's death had been all over the news. Tech billionaire dies suddenly. You couldn't avoid it. And I remembered thinking it was sad how young she was. 43. That's not old. "So you listened," Montgomery said. No judgment in his voice, just statement of fact. "I listened. The door was cracked open maybe 2 inches. I could see shadows moving. One of them, I realize now it was Marcus Cross, was pacing, agitated. The other one, the doctor, he was sitting down. His voice was shaky." Aaron closed his eyes, pulling the memory into sharp focus. He'd spent the last 2 days replaying that conversation in his head, making sure he had every word right. Marcus said, "We need the burial by Friday at the latest. Saturday morning would be ideal. Quick turnaround, fewer questions." And the doctor, Dr. Webb, he said, "This is insane, Marcus. If anyone runs a toxicology screen," and Marcus cut him off. "Nobody's running anything. You signed the death certificate, natural causes, cardiac event. Who's going to question the family physician?" Detective Park leaned forward. "What did Dr. Webb say to that?" He said, "What if she wakes up? Just like that. What if she wakes up?" And there was this long silence, And then Marcus laughed. Not a happy laugh. Cold. He said, "That's why we bury her Saturday morning, Harrison. The compound you gave her will keep her under for 48 hours, maybe 50. We put her in the ground Friday or Saturday, and even if the drug wears off early, she's 6 feet under before she can do anything about it." The detectives exchanged glances. Montgomery's pen had stopped moving. "Those were his exact words?" Park asked. "Even if the drug wears off early, she's 6 feet under?" "Exact words. I've got a good memory for conversations. It's what made me a good paramedic. Remembering patient histories, medication interactions, details that mattered." Aaron's voice went quiet. "It's also what's made the last 7 years hell, remembering every word of my daughter's last phone call." Park gave him a moment, then gently pressed forward. "What else did they say?" Dr. Webb was falling apart. He kept saying it was murder, that he couldn't go through with it, that he'd already done too much. And Marcus got very calm. That's what scared me most, actually, how calm he got. He said, "Harrison, listen to me very carefully. You've already administered 3 doses of the compound. Your signature is on every prescription, every medical note. If you back out now, if you develop a conscience now, you're not saving anyone. You're just guaranteeing we both go to prison while Evelyn dies anyway from the cumulative dose already in her system." "Was that true?" Montgomery asked. "Would the cumulative dose have killed her anyway?" "I don't know. I'm not a doctor, not anymore. But Dr. Webb believed it, or wanted to believe it. He stopped arguing after that." Aaron's hands tightened around the coffee cup. Marcus told him the burial was set for Saturday at 11. Quick service, immediate interment, no delays. He said he'd already bribed the cemetery foreman to have the plot filled and covered by noon. "No chance for second thoughts," he said. "No opportunity for anyone to ask questions." "Did they mention why?" Park asked. "Why Marcus wanted his wife dead?" "Money, control, the company." Aaron shrugged. Marcus said something about divorce lawyers circling and forensic accountants finding things they shouldn't find. He said once Evelyn was gone, the insurance payout plus his inheritance plus his stock options would make him untouchable. And Dr. Webb said, "What about the board at Helix?" And Marcus laughed again, same cold laugh. He said the board would fall in line once he controlled Evelyn's voting shares. He'd already lined up support from 3 key members who were tired of Evelyn's ethics crusade. Detective Park sat back in her chair, processing. "And you heard all this through a cracked door at 1:30 in the morning?" "Yes." "Why didn't you call the police right then?" It was the question Aaron had been dreading, the question he'd been asking himself for 2 days straight. "Because 7 years ago, I did call the police," Aaron said quietly. "Multiple times. About Richard Fenton beating his wife. And you know what happened? Nothing. He was connected. Had friends in the department, in the DA's office, in places that mattered. Reports got filed and buried, and eventually he killed 2 people because the system failed." "So you didn't trust us to handle it," Montgomery said. "No judgment, just understanding. I didn't trust anyone to handle it, and I thought, maybe I misheard. Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe there was some explanation I wasn't seeing. Rich people do strange things. Maybe it was just dark humor, or maybe I was projecting my own trauma onto a situation that didn't." Aaron stopped, shook his head. "I told myself a lot of things over those 2 days. All of them were lies. I knew what I heard. I just didn't know if I had the courage to act on it." "But you did act," Park said. "You showed up at that funeral and stopped a murder in front of 300 witnesses. That took serious courage. It took desperation. I spent 2 days researching, trying to figure out what drug could mimic death. I found references to compounds that slow metabolic functions, old Soviet experiments, rare toxins. I tracked down a guy I used to work with, paramedic, who went into veterinary medicine. I asked him hypothetically what could counteract severe bradycardia, and he told me about atropine. I bought some off him, no questions asked, and I showed up at that cemetery with no plan except to stop them from burying her alive." "You risked your job, possible assault charges, public humiliation, all based on a conversation you overheard 2 days earlier," Montgomery observed. "I risked a minimum wage job in a life I was barely living anyway," Aaron corrected. "The real risk was doing nothing. Again!" Detective Park stood and walked to the window, staring out at the darkening city. Mr. Cole, your testimony is going to be crucial to this case. Marcus Cross has already lawyered up. 3 attorneys showed up at the station within an hour of his arrest. They're going to argue that you're unstable, that you have a history of trauma and paranoia, that you hallucinated or fabricated this conversation. They're going to destroy your credibility. Let them try, Aaron said simply. I know what I heard. It's not just about what you heard. We need evidence. Dr. Webb is talking. He's already given a preliminary statement, and he's ready to flip completely in exchange for a reduced sentence. But a good defense attorney will argue he's just trying to save himself by supporting your story. We need physical evidence. The drug, the prescription records, financial trails showing motive. Then you better start digging, Aaron interrupted, standing to face her. Because I did my part. I stopped the burial. I saved her life. Now you do yours. Prove what they did, and make sure they never get the chance to do it again. The 2 detectives looked at each other, some unspoken communication passing between them. Finally, Park nodded. You're free to go, Mr. Cole, but don't leave the city. We'll need you to testify when this goes to trial, and trust me, it's going to trial. Marcus Cross won't plea bargain. His ego won't allow it. I'll be here, Aaron said. I'm not running from this. As he stood to leave, Montgomery called out, One more thing. Mrs. Cross asked about you at the hospital. Apparently told her lawyers to make sure you had legal representation if you needed it, and to cover any expenses you incurred. She's serious about helping you. Aaron paused at the door. I don't want her money. I just want her alive. Sometimes people need to say thank you, Mr. Cole. Sometimes letting them help you is actually helping them. Something to think about. The hospital corridor gleamed under fluorescent lights that never slept. Evelyn Cross lay in a private room on the 8th floor, surrounded by more security than most heads of state. 2 guards at her door, cameras covering every angle, strict visitor restrictions. After someone tries to bury you alive, trust becomes a luxury you can't afford. Her lawyer, Margaret Chen, sat beside the bed, working through a stack of documents that seemed to multiply every time Evelyn looked at them. Margaret was 56, fierce as a wolverine, and had been Evelyn's personal attorney for 15 years. She'd seen Evelyn build Helix Technologies from a garage startup to a global powerhouse. She'd negotiated billion-dollar deals and fought off hostile takeovers. But she'd never seen anything like this. The insurance company has frozen all death benefit payouts pending investigation, Margaret said, not looking up from her paperwork. Smart move on their part. Marcus was set to receive $200 million from your life insurance policy alone. Evelyn stared at the ceiling, her body still feeling strange and disconnected. The doctors had said it would take days for all the drugs to fully clear her system, days for her heart rate to normalize, for her neurological functions to stabilize, for the nightmares to maybe, possibly, start to fade. What about Helix? Evelyn asked. Her voice was stronger now, though still raspy. The board held an emergency meeting 3 hours ago. Marcus has been suspended from all duties pending the outcome of the criminal investigation. Your second-in-command, David Okonkwo, has assumed acting CEO responsibilities. The stock took a hit, down 18%, but David gave a statement that steadied things. He's good in a crisis. David's good, period. I should have made him co-CEO years ago. Evelyn closed her eyes, exhaustion pulling at her despite the adrenaline still coursing through her system. What about the assets? Our shared accounts, the house, I've filed for emergency asset freezing and a restraining order. Marcus can't access any joint accounts, can't come within 500 feet of you, can't dispose of any shared property. The DA is also looking into filing charges for attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, and about a dozen other counts. Evelyn, Margaret finally looked up, and her expression was softer than usual. He almost succeeded. If that janitor hadn't been there, if he hadn't listened, if he hadn't been brave enough to act. I know, Evelyn whispered. Trust me, I know. There was a soft knock at the door. One of the security guards poked his head in. Mrs. Cross, there's a visitor requesting to see you, Aaron Cole. Should I? Let him in, Evelyn said immediately, pushing herself up to a sitting position. Please. Margaret gathered her papers. I'll give you privacy, but Evelyn, be careful what you promise. Gratitude is one thing, legally binding obligations are another. Noted, Evelyn said, but her attention was already on the door. Aaron Cole stepped into the room looking like a man who'd been through a war and lost badly. His eyes were shadowed with exhaustion, his clothes rumpled from hours in the police station. He held his worn baseball cap in both hands, turning it over and over, a nervous gesture that made him seem younger and older at the same time. "Mr. Cole," Evelyn said, and her voice broke slightly. "Aaron, please, sit down." "I don't want to intrude, Mrs. Cross. I just wanted to check. Make sure you were okay. The doctor said you were stable, but I'm alive because of you," Evelyn interrupted. "Okay is relative, but alive is everything. Please, sit." Aaron perched on the edge of the visitor's chair, still clutching his cap. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. There were too many words and not enough words simultaneously. "They're saying you heard Marcus and Dr. Webb planning it," Evelyn finally said. "2 nights ago, at the funeral home." "I did. I heard every word. The detectives have my full statement." "Why did you believe what you heard? Why not dismiss it as, I don't know, dark humor or paranoia?" Aaron met her eyes steadily. "Because 7 years ago I dismissed my instincts about a dangerous man, and it cost me everyone I loved. I wasn't going to make that mistake again, not when a life was at stake." Evelyn absorbed this, recognizing the weight of old grief in his voice. "The detective mentioned you lost your daughter. And my wife. Both gone because I chose safety over action, chose not to make waves over doing what was right." Aaron's jaw tightened. "When I heard your husband plotting to bury you alive, I had a choice. Be the man I used to be, the man who stayed quiet and regretted it forever, or be someone different, someone braver. I chose brave. Finally." "You saved my life at great personal risk," Evelyn said softly. "You had no reason to believe anyone would listen to you, no guarantee your intervention would work, no assurance you wouldn't be arrested or worse. You did it anyway." "What else could I do? Let you die because standing up seemed hard?" Aaron shook his head. "That's not courage. That's basic human decency. The real courage is what comes next, facing what your husband did, rebuilding your life, trusting people again after the person you trusted most tried to kill you." Evelyn's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back. She'd cried enough for one day. "My lawyer says I should be careful about what I promise you, about legally binding obligations. But Aaron, I need you to understand, whatever you need, whatever would help you, it's yours. A job, money, a house, legal representation, anything. Name it and it's done." "I don't want your money," Aaron said, echoing what he'd told the detectives. "I did what anyone should have done, but not what anyone would do. There's a difference." Evelyn leaned forward, ignoring the protests from her still recovering body. "Aaron, you spent 7 years punishing yourself for something that wasn't your fault. You lost your family to violence and then lost yourself to grief. You took a job where you could be invisible, where you wouldn't have to feel or risk or try. And then you heard someone planning to murder me, and you became visible again. You took the biggest risk of your life. Don't you think that means something?" Aaron was quiet for a long time. Outside the hospital window, the city lights were coming on, thousands of lives being lived in thousands of different ways. "When Maya died," he said slowly, "when Sophie took those pills, I wanted to die too. But I was too much of a coward even for that. So I chose the next best thing, a life that didn't require me to be fully alive. I stopped being a paramedic because I couldn't save people without seeing Maya in every patient. I stopped having friends because I couldn't stand their pity. I stopped existing in any way that mattered." "And now?" Evelyn asked gently. "Now I'm terrified," Aaron admitted, "because for the first time in 7 years, I feel like I might want to live again, really live. And I don't know if I remember how." Evelyn reached out and took his weathered hand in hers. "Then let me help you remember. Not because you saved my life, though you did. Not because I owe you, though I do. But because you took the first brave step, and sometimes we all need someone to help us take the second one." Aaron looked at their joined hands, this unlikely connection between a billionaire and a janitor, between a woman pulled back from death and a man pulled back from a different kind of grave. "What did you have in mind?" he asked. "I don't know yet, but I have excellent resources and a lot of gratitude. We'll figure it out together. Deal?" Aaron managed a small smile, the first genuine smile he'd worn in longer than he could remember. Deal. They talked for another hour. Evelyn told him about Helix Technologies, about the company she'd built on principles of ethical data use and privacy protection, about how Marcus had spent their entire marriage trying to get her to compromise those principles for profit. Aaron told her about his years as a paramedic, about Maya's dream of becoming a doctor, about Sophie's garden that he still couldn't bear to visit. She grew roses, Aaron said. Pink ones. They probably took over the whole yard by now. I couldn't go back to that house after she died. Couldn't face the memories. Maybe someday you could, Evelyn suggested. Maybe someday the memories won't hurt quite so much. Maybe, Aaron agreed, though he didn't sound convinced. A nurse entered to check Evelyn's vitals and suggested Aaron let her rest. He stood, replacing his cap on his head. I'll come back tomorrow if that's okay, he said. The detective said not to leave town anyway. Please do. And Evelyn waited until he met her eyes. Thank you for seeing me when no one else did, for hearing what no one else heard, for caring when it would have been so much easier not to. Thank you for living, Aaron replied, repeating what he'd said at the cemetery. For fighting, for making it worth it. After he left, Evelyn lay back against her pillows and stared at the ceiling, her mind racing despite her body's exhaustion. Somewhere in this city, Marcus was sitting in a jail cell, probably still insisting this was all a misunderstanding, still believing his money and connections would save him. Somewhere, Dr. Webb was negotiating his plea bargain, trying to trade his testimony for leniency. And somewhere, the media was having a feeding frenzy over the story of the century. Billionaire almost buried alive by her own husband. But here, in this quiet hospital room, Evelyn felt something she hadn't felt in months. Hope. Not for her marriage, that was dead and buried, ironically enough. Not for privacy. Her life was about to become a public spectacle during the trial. But hope that maybe, just maybe, the universe had sent her Aaron Cole for a reason. Had given her a second chance, not just at life, but at understanding what life should be. Her phone buzzed. A text from David Okonkwo. Board wants statement from you ASAP. Media pressure intense. Are you up for video conference tomorrow? Evelyn typed back. Yes. Schedule for 10 a.m. And David? Thank you for holding things together. That's what second-in-commands do. Focus on healing. We've got the company. Another text. This one from her younger sister, Claire, who lived in Seattle. I'm on the next flight. Don't argue. You need family right now. Evelyn smiled despite everything. Claire was fierce and loving and wouldn't take no for an answer. Having her here would help. A third text from a number she didn't recognize. This is Detective Park. Wanted to update you. We've executed search warrants on Marcus's office, your home, and Dr. Webb's clinic. Already found prescription records that support Aaron's testimony. This case is solid. You're safe now. Safe. Such a simple word for such a complicated feeling. Was she safe? Physically, yes. Marcus was locked up. Security surrounded her. The immediate danger had passed. But emotionally, psychologically, how did you feel safe again after the person who'd promised to love and cherish you had instead plotted your murder? Evelyn didn't have an answer, but she had time now to find one. Time that Aaron Cole had given her when he'd chosen to be brave. She closed her eyes and let sleep take her, dreamless and deep. Tomorrow would bring challenges, the board meeting, the media statements, the beginning of a very public legal battle. But tonight, she was alive. And sometimes, that had to be enough. Across the city, Aaron sat in his small studio apartment, a place he'd rented 7 years ago and never bothered to make into a home. The walls were bare. The furniture was minimal. There were no photos, no personal touches, nothing that indicated a life being lived rather than simply endured. He made himself a cup of tea and sat by the window, watching the city move below him. His phone had 17 missed calls from reporters who'd somehow gotten his number. He'd ignored all of them. Whatever story they wanted to tell, he wasn't interested in being part of their narrative. But Evelyn's offer kept circling in his mind. Whatever you need, she'd said. Anything. What did he need? He'd been asking himself that question for 7 years and always came up with the same answer. Nothing. He needed nothing because wanting things, hoping for things, building things, all of that required vulnerability, required risking loss again. And he'd lost enough. Except now, sitting in this empty apartment with his heart still racing from the day's events, Aaron realized that maybe needing nothing wasn't strength. Maybe it was just another form of cowardice. Maybe choosing not to want was just another way of choosing not to live. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Mr. Cole, this is Margaret Chen, Evelyn Cross's attorney. She's asked me to arrange whatever support you might need. Legal representation, financial assistance, housing, anything. Please call me at your convenience." Aaron stared at the message for a long time. Then, slowly, he began to type a response. "Ms. Chen, I don't need financial help, but I do need something else. 7 years ago, I let my paramedic certification lapse. I walked away from the work I loved because I couldn't face the memories. I'm not sure I'm ready to go back to it, but maybe I could start by volunteering, emergency medical training for community groups, or teaching CPR, or something that uses the skills I spent 20 years building. Can you help me find something like that?" He hit send before he could second-guess himself, before fear could make him delete the message and retreat back into safety. The response came 2 minutes later. "I'll make some calls. This is a good step, Aaron. A brave one." Aaron smiled slightly. Brave. People kept using that word. Maybe if enough of them said it, he'd start to believe it himself. 3 weeks later, the courtroom was packed beyond capacity. People lined the walls, squeezed into every available space, while overflow crowds gathered in the hallway, watching on closed-circuit monitors. This wasn't just a trial. It was theater, spectacle, a real-life thriller that had captivated the entire nation. Marcus Cross sat at the defense table in an immaculate Navy suit, his posture perfect, his expression one of wounded dignity. His legal team, led by the infamous defense attorney Vincent Caruso, who'd never lost a murder case, flanked him like a wall of expensive armor. Caruso was 72, silver-haired, and had a voice that could convince juries that up was down and black was white. Across the aisle, Deputy District Attorney Rachel Kim organized her files with methodical precision. At 39, she was young for such a high-profile case, but she'd built her reputation on taking down wealthy defendants who thought money could buy innocence. She'd specifically requested this case when it crossed her desk. Men who tried to murder their wives and bury them alive didn't get to walk free, not on her watch. Evelyn sat in the front row of the gallery, her sister Claire beside her, holding her hand. Evelyn had recovered physically. The drugs had cleared her system, her heart rate had normalized, the waxy death pale had left her skin. But emotionally, she was still learning how to exist in a world where the man she'd loved, trusted, and built a life with had tried to erase her from existence. 3 rows back, Aaron Cole sat alone, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. He'd been subpoenaed as a witness and had spent the last 2 weeks preparing his testimony with Rachel Kim's team. They'd warned him that Caruso would try to destroy his credibility, would dig into his past, would use his grief and trauma as weapons against him. Aaron had listened to all of it and said simply, "Let him try. I know what I heard." Judge Patricia Thornton entered and everyone rose. She was 65, no nonsense, and had a reputation for running tight courtrooms where legal theatrics died quick deaths. She'd been a prosecutor herself once, put away 3 serial killers and a corrupt governor. Nothing fazed her. "Be seated," she said, her voice crisp. "We're here for the trial of Marcus Cross, charged with attempted murder in the first degree, conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, and witness tampering. Ms. Kim, your opening statement." Rachel Kim stood, buttoning her jacket. She didn't go to the jury immediately. Instead, she walked to the evidence table and picked up a photograph. The casket, open and empty, sitting beside grave plot 447. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this is a coffin that was supposed to be a tomb. This is where Evelyn Cross was meant to spend eternity. Not because she died of natural causes, not because her time had come, but because her husband decided she was worth more dead than alive." She placed the photo on the easel facing the jury. 12 faces stared at it, already transfixed. "The prosecution will prove that Marcus Cross, with the help of Dr. Harrison Webb, administered a compound designed to mimic death, that he rushed his wife's burial to avoid autopsy, that he planned to inherit her fortune, control her company, and live the rest of his life as a grieving widower while his wife suffocated 6 feet underground. We will prove this through prescription records, financial documents, and the eyewitness testimony of a man who overheard the entire plot and had the courage to stop it. Rachel walked to the jury box, making eye contact with each juror. The defense will try to convince you that this is all a misunderstanding, that Aaron Cole, our primary witness, is unreliable, that Dr. Webb is lying to save himself, that Marcus Cross is just a loving husband caught in tragic circumstances. But the evidence doesn't lie. The timeline doesn't lie. And most importantly, Evelyn Cross is alive today only because one man refused to let evil succeed in silence. She returned to her table. At the end of this trial, we will ask you to find Marcus Cross guilty on all counts, not because we're vindictive, but because justice demands that people who try to murder their spouses face consequences. Thank you. Vincent Caruso rose slowly, letting the silence build. He was a master of pacing, of drama, of making every gesture count. He didn't go to the jury. He went to Marcus, placing a hand on his client's shoulder, a father protecting his son, a gesture designed to humanize the defendant. My client, Caruso began, his voice rich and warm, is sitting here today because of a janitor's overactive imagination and a doctor's desperate attempt to avoid malpractice charges. That's it. That's this entire case. He moved toward the jury with the easy confidence of a man who'd done this 1,000 times. Aaron Cole is a tragic figure. I don't say that to be cruel. I say it because it's true. He lost his daughter and wife 7 years ago in a terrible incident. That kind of trauma changes people. It can make them see patterns where none exist, hear threats where there's only conversation, become convinced they're witnessing something sinister when the reality is far more mundane. Caruso pulled out his own photograph. Aaron in his cemetery coveralls, looking disheveled and exhausted. It was from the day of the funeral, but out of context, it made Aaron look unstable. This man claims he overheard my client and Dr. Webb plotting murder. But there's no recording of this conversation, no other witnesses, just his word. The word of a man with diagnosed PTSD, a man who admits to hallucinations in his medical records, a man who's been on anti-anxiety medication for 7 years. Rachel Kim tensed but didn't object. Caruso was staying just inside the lines of what was permissible. As for Dr. Webb, Caruso continued, he's a doctor facing malpractice lawsuits from the Cross family for his negligent treatment of Evelyn. Of course, he's willing to support Mr. Cole's fantasy. It shifts blame away from his medical incompetence and onto my client. Classic malpractice defense. When you can't deny you made a mistake, claim someone forced you to do it. Caruso walked back to Marcus, standing beside him like they were old friends. Marcus Cross loved his wife. He built a life with her. Yes, their marriage had problems. What marriage doesn't after 15 years? Yes, he made mistakes. He had an affair. He was weak. He's not proud of it. But being a bad husband doesn't make you a murderer. And the prosecution cannot prove beyond a reasonable doubt that my client intended to kill anyone. He faced the jury directly now, his expression earnest. What the prosecution can prove is that Evelyn Cross had a rare reaction to legitimately prescribed medication, that she fell into a death-like coma that fooled even experienced medical professionals, that she was pronounced dead by a licensed physician following proper protocol, and that she woke up, tragically, at her own funeral, because sometimes medicine gets it wrong. Tragic? Absolutely. Criminal? Not even close. Caruso returned to his seat. At the end of this trial, we will ask you to see through the prosecution's narrative and recognize this for what it is. A terrible medical mistake being weaponized by a traumatized janitor and a liability-dodging doctor. Thank you. Judge Thornton looked at the clock. We'll break for lunch. Court resumes at 1:30 with the prosecution's first witness. The courtroom erupted into controlled chaos. Reporters raced for the exits to file stories. Spectators buzzed with conversation. Aaron sat frozen, Caruso's words echoing in his head. Hallucinations. PTSD. Unreliable. The attorney had taken his grief and turned it into a weapon against him. Rachel Kim appeared beside him. Don't listen to him. He's doing his job, which is to create doubt. We'll counter every single point in our case. Are you ready to testify? When? Aaron asked. Tomorrow morning. You're our second witness, right after Dr. Webb. Rachel's expression softened. I know Caruso's opening was rough, but juries are smart. They'll see through his manipulation once they hear your testimony and see the evidence. Trust the process. Aaron nodded, but doubt had already started creeping in. What if Caruso was right? What if his trauma had made him hear something that wasn't there? What if he destroyed an innocent man's life because his grief-broken mind had conjured a conspiracy? Evelyn found him in the hallway during the lunch break. Claire had gone to get food, leaving them a moment of privacy in the crowded corridor. "How are you holding up?" she asked. "Caruso made me sound like a delusional mental patient," Aaron said flatly. "Maybe he's not wrong." "Stop that," Evelyn's voice was sharp. "You saved my life. The evidence supports everything you said. Don't let a defense attorney's theatrics make you doubt what you know to be true." "But what if I—" "Aaron!" Evelyn gripped his arm, forcing him to look at her. "I was there. I was the one who felt my heart slow to almost nothing. I was the one who spent hours in that gray space between life and death. I was the one who saw Marcus's face when I woke up. And let me tell you, that was not the face of an innocent man. That was panic. That was guilt. That was a man watching his murder plot fail in real time." Aaron absorbed this, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. "You heard what you heard," Evelyn continued. "You acted on it. You saved me. Everything else is just a defense attorney doing his job. Don't give him power over your truth." The afternoon session began with Dr. Harrison Webb taking the stand. He looked like he'd aged 20 years in 3 weeks. His hands shook as he was sworn in, his voice barely audible as he confirmed his name and credentials. Rachel Kim approached gently. She needed Webb's testimony, but she also needed the jury to see his genuine remorse. "Dr. Webb, how long were you the Cross family physician?" 12 years. I treated both Marcus and Evelyn for routine medical issues, annual physicals, minor illnesses. "And did there come a time when Marcus Cross asked you to prescribe something unusual for his wife?" Webb swallowed hard. "Yes. About 6 weeks before the funeral. He said Evelyn was having trouble sleeping due to stress. Asked me to prescribe a sedative, Ambien, 10 milligrams. Nothing unusual about that request. What happened next?" 2 weeks later, he asked for something stronger. Said the Ambien wasn't working. I prescribed a beta blocker to help with anxiety and heart palpitations. Again, not unusual for someone under high stress. Rachel walked to the evidence table, retrieving a small vial. "Doctor, do you recognize this?" Webb's face crumpled. "Yes, that's the third compound, the one that caused the death-like state. Who provided this compound to you?" "Marcus did. He brought it to my office 3 days before Evelyn's collapse. He said it was a supplement, something to help her sleep more deeply. He asked me to administer it during her next office visit." "Did you question what was in it?" "I should have." Tears ran down Webb's weathered face. "I should have tested it, researched it, refused to give her anything I didn't fully understand. But Marcus was persuasive, and he implied that if I didn't help him, certain past medical board complaints might resurface." Caruso was on his feet. "Objection, hearsay and speculation about implied threats." "Sustained," Judge Thornton said. "The jury will disregard the witness's statement about implied threats." Rachel shifted tactics. "Dr. Webb, did you administer this compound to Evelyn Cross?" "Yes. During her office visit on November 12th, I told her it was a vitamin injection. She trusted me." His voice broke completely. "She trusted me and I poisoned her." "What effect did it have?" "Within 6 hours, according to Marcus, she collapsed at home. He called 911, but by the time paramedics arrived, her vitals were so low they were barely detectable. She was brought to the hospital, and I was called in as her physician of record. I examined her and—" Webb covered his face with his hands. "I pronounced her dead. I signed the death certificate knowing she wasn't dead. Knowing the compound would wear off in 48 to 50 hours. Knowing Marcus planned to bury her before she woke up." The courtroom was absolutely silent. Several jurors were crying. "Why did you go along with this?" Rachel asked softly. "Because I was a coward. Because I'd already administered the drug, and Marcus convinced me we were both in too deep. Because he said if I backed out, I'd go to prison anyway, and Evelyn would still die from the cumulative dose. I don't know if that was true, but I believed it. I wanted to believe it. When did you realize you couldn't go through with it? At the funeral. When I saw her in that casket. When I reached into my pocket and felt the counteragent I'd brought just in case. When Aaron Cole started shouting that she wasn't dead, and I had to choose, be a murderer or be a coward who tried to make things right. Webb looked directly at the jury. I chose wrong so many times before that moment. But when it mattered most, when Aaron gave me a chance to save her instead of killing her, I took it. I administered the counteragent, and she lived. Not because of me, despite me. But at least I didn't compound my evil by letting her die. Rachel let that sit for a moment before continuing. Dr. Webb, you've pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit murder in exchange for your testimony here today. Is everything you've told this jury the truth? Every word. I have nothing left to lose except my soul, and maybe this helps me keep a piece of it. No further questions. Caruso's cross-examination was brutal. He painted Webb as a desperate man facing malpractice suits, willing to say anything to reduce his sentence. He questioned the timeline, the compound's effects, whether Webb could really know what Marcus's intentions were. But Webb didn't waver. He admitted his guilt, his cowardice, his terrible choices, and that consistency, that self-flagellating honesty, made him credible despite everything. By the time court adjourned for the day, the prosecution's case had landed its first major blow. The jury had seen a doctor confess to helping poison a patient. They'd seen genuine remorse and heard detailed testimony about the plot. But the real test would come tomorrow, when Aaron took the stand. That night, Aaron couldn't sleep. He lay in his small apartment, staring at the ceiling, rehearsing his testimony over and over. Rachel had coached him extensively. Tell the truth, don't embellish. If you don't remember something, say so. Don't let Caruso rattle you. Stay calm, stay consistent. Easy advice, harder to follow when your credibility would be shredded by one of the best defense attorneys in the country. His phone buzzed. A text from Evelyn. You're going to be fine tomorrow. Just tell them what you told me. The truth. That's all anyone needs to hear. Another text, this one from Margaret Chen. Remember, Caruso's job is to create doubt. Your job is to be honest. Honesty always wins in the end. Aaron wanted to believe that, but he'd seen too much of the world to think honesty always triumphed over money and power and expensive legal teams. He got up, made tea, and stood by his window watching the city. Somewhere out there, Marcus Cross was in a jail cell, probably sleeping soundly because he believed his money would save him. Somewhere, Evelyn was in her sister's guest room, trying to rebuild a life from the ashes of betrayal. Somewhere, 12 jurors were forming opinions that would determine whether attempted murder had consequences or whether wealth could buy a pass even for burying someone alive. Aaron's phone buzzed again, this time an unknown number. Mr. Cole, this is Juror 7. Just kidding, it's Detective Park. Wanted to remind you that your testimony tomorrow matters. We've built a solid case, but you're the foundation. Get some sleep. You've got this. Aaron smiled despite his anxiety. Park had been checking in regularly since the arrest, making sure he was okay, keeping him updated on the investigation's progress. She believed in him. Evelyn believed in him. Margaret believed in him. Maybe it was time he started believing in himself. He went back to bed, and this time, sleep came. Fitful and interrupted by dreams of coffins and courtrooms, but sleep nonetheless. The next morning, Aaron Cole took the stand at 9:47 a.m. He was sworn in, his voice steady, his hand firm on the Bible despite his lack of religious faith. Truth was truth, whether sworn on scripture or not. Rachel Kim smiled at him reassuringly. Mr. Cole, please state your full name and occupation for the record. Aaron Michael Cole. I worked as a cemetery groundskeeper and part-time janitor. How long did you work at Riverside Memorial Cemetery? 7 years. And how long did you work at Patterson's funeral home? 4 years, part-time. Tuesday and Thursday nights, usually 11 p.m. to 3 a.m. Rachel walked him through his background methodically. His 20 years as a paramedic, his excellent record, his specialized training in emergency medicine. She was building his credibility before Caruso could tear it down. Mr. Cole, directing your attention to November 15th of this year, were you working at Patterson's funeral home that night? Yes. I'd switched shifts with another janitor. I was there from 11:30 p.m. to about 3:15 a.m. What were you doing around 1:30 in the morning? Mopping the administrative wing. The offices are usually empty that late, but as I approached Mr. Patterson's private office, I heard voices. How many voices? Two, both male, speaking quietly but not whispering. Could you hear what they were saying? Not at first. I was about to leave. It wasn't my business. But then one of them mentioned the Cross funeral, and I stopped. Why did you stop? Aaron looked directly at the jury. Because Evelyn Cross's death had been all over the news. Everyone knew about it. A billionaire dying suddenly at 43. That's not something you forget. And I heard these two men discussing her funeral in a way that seemed wrong, so I listened. Where were you positioned? About 6 feet from the office door. It was cracked open maybe 2 inches. I could see shadows moving inside, but I couldn't see faces clearly. What did you hear? Aaron took a breath, centering himself. This was the moment that mattered. The first voice, I later realized it was Marcus Cross, said, "We need the burial by Friday at the latest. Saturday morning would be ideal. Quick turnaround, fewer questions." And the second voice, which was Dr. Webb, said, "This is insane, Marcus. If anyone runs a toxicology screen," and Marcus cut him off. He said, "Nobody's running anything. You signed the death certificate, natural causes, cardiac event. Who's going to question the family physician?" Rachel nodded. What happened next? Dr. Webb asked, "What if she wakes up?" Just like that, very clearly. And there was silence for maybe 5 seconds, and then Marcus laughed. It was cold, humorless. And he said, "That's why we bury her Saturday morning, Harrison. The compound you gave her will keep her under for 48 hours, maybe 50. We put her in the ground Friday or Saturday, and even if the drug wears off early, she's 6 feet under before she can do anything about it." Several jurors gasped. Evelyn's hand flew to her mouth. Marcus sat stone-faced, but a muscle twitched in his jaw. Rachel let the silence build before asking, "Are you certain those were his exact words?" "Absolutely certain. I've replayed that conversation in my head every day for 3 weeks. She's 6 feet under before she can do anything about it." Those were his exact words. What else did they discuss? Aaron detailed the rest of the conversation. Dr. Webb's objections, Marcus's manipulation, the discussion of burial timing, the references to insurance money and controlling Helix technologies. He spoke clearly, without embellishment, sticking to exactly what he'd heard. "Mr. Cole, what did you do after hearing this conversation?" "I waited until they left, maybe 20 minutes later, and then I finished my shift. I went home and I spent 2 days trying to figure out what to do." "Why didn't you call the police immediately?" This was the vulnerable moment. Aaron met Rachel's eyes and told the truth. "Because 7 years ago, I called the police about a domestic violence situation. Multiple times, and nothing happened. The abuser had connections, money, friends in the right places. And eventually, he killed his wife and my daughter. I learned that sometimes the system fails, and calling for help doesn't guarantee anyone will listen. So what did you do instead?" "I researched. I tried to figure out what drug could mimic death well enough to fool a doctor. I found references to compounds that slow metabolic function to near-death levels. I contacted a former colleague who works in veterinary medicine and asked hypothetically what could counteract severe bradycardia. He told me about atropine. I bought some from him, and I went to that funeral planning to stop them from burying her alive." "Were you certain you'd heard correctly, that this wasn't a misunderstanding?" "I was certain. Because when I looked at Marcus Cross's face as that casket was being lowered, I didn't see grief. I saw a man watching a plan succeed. And when I shouted for them to stop, when I said she wasn't dead, his first reaction wasn't relief or hope. It was rage. That told me everything I needed to know." "No further questions," Rachel said. Vincent Caruso approached like a shark scenting blood. He smiled at Aaron, friendly, grandfatherly, completely false. "Mr. Cole, you testified that you have PTSD from the death of your daughter. Is that correct?" "I have trauma from losing my daughter and wife, yes." "And you've been on medication for anxiety and depression for 7 years?" "Yes." "Have you ever experienced hallucinations as a side effect of that medication?" Aaron paused. Rachel had warned him this was coming. I've had intrusive thoughts and flashbacks to traumatic memories. I wouldn't characterize them as hallucinations. But your medical records indicate that you reported to your psychiatrist that you sometimes hear your daughter's voice. Is that correct? The courtroom tensed. Aaron felt his face flush, but he kept his voice steady. In the first year after Maya died, yes. I sometimes thought I heard her calling me. That's a common grief response, not a psychotic break. But you heard voices that weren't there. Voices of people who weren't present. Isn't that the definition of an auditory hallucination? I was grieving. Please answer yes or no. Did you experience auditory hallucinations? Aaron's jaw clenched. By technical definition, yes. But that was 7 years ago, and it was my daughter's voice in my memory, not random voices. So you admit you've had issues distinguishing between real sounds and imagined ones. Rachel objected, argumentative and mischaracterizing testimony. Sustained, Judge Thornton said. Rephrase, Mr. Caruso. Caruso shifted tactics smoothly. Mr. Cole, you claim you overheard this conversation from 6 feet away through a cracked door at 1:30 in the morning, correct? Yes. Were you tired? I'd been working for 2 hours. I was alert. But you work nights regularly. Doesn't that disrupt your natural sleep cycle? I'm used to it. Have you ever fallen asleep during a shift? Aaron hesitated. Once or twice over 4 years, yes. During slow periods? So it's possible you were drowsy that night and dreamed or imagined this conversation? No, I know what I heard. You know what you think you heard. But Mr. Cole, isn't it true that you have a documented history of seeing patterns of abuse and violence where others don't? You reported your daughter's killer to police multiple times before he acted, but officers who investigated found no evidence of imminent danger. You saw something others didn't see, or you imagined something that wasn't there. Rachel was on her feet. Objection! Counsel is deliberately distorting Mr. Cole's heroic attempts to prevent. Withdrawn, Caruso said smoothly. Mr. Cole, let me ask you this. If you truly believed you'd overheard a murder plot, why not record it? Why not get proof? I didn't have my phone on me, and by the time I realized what I was hearing, they were already mid-conversation. How convenient. No recording, no other witnesses, just your word. My word and Dr. Webb's confession, which corroborates everything I said. Caruso's smile widened. Ah, yes, Dr. Webb. A man facing criminal charges who has every reason to support your story to minimize his sentence. Tell me, did you and Dr. Webb coordinate your testimony? No, I've never spoken to Dr. Webb outside of that night. Really? Never? Not even after the arrest? We were both questioned by police separately. We've never had a private conversation. Caruso walked to the defense table, retrieving a document. Mr. Cole, you testified that you bought atropine from a veterinary colleague. Isn't it true that purchasing prescription medication without proper authorization is illegal? Aaron felt the trap closing. I was trying to save someone's life. So you admit to breaking the law? I admit to doing what was necessary. And isn't it true that you administered this illegally obtained medication to Evelyn Cross without her consent, without proper medical supervision, at her funeral? I gave her 3 drops under her tongue to counteract the poison her husband gave her. But you're not a licensed physician. You have no legal authority to administer medication. You could have killed her with an incorrect dose, didn't that occur to you? Aaron leaned forward, his voice hardening. What occurred to me was that she was about to be buried alive, that doing nothing guaranteed her death, that taking a risk with atropine gave her a chance. I chose the option that gave her life. Or you chose to insert yourself into a situation you didn't fully understand, administered an unknown substance to an unconscious woman, and got lucky that you didn't kill her yourself. I saved her life. You created a dramatic scene at a funeral and happened not to make things worse. That's not the same thing. Rachel objected again, and Judge Thornton sustained it, but the damage was done. Caruso had planted doubt. Maybe Aaron was well-meaning but delusional. Maybe his trauma made him see conspiracies. Maybe his actions were reckless rather than heroic. Caruso continued for another hour, poking holes, suggesting alternatives, making Aaron repeat details until the jury's eyes glazed over. It was masterful cross-examination, designed to exhaust and confuse. But Aaron didn't break. He stuck to his story because it wasn't a story. It was the truth, and truth had a weight that lies couldn't match. Finally, Caruso asked his closing question. Mr. Cole, isn't it possible, just possible, that you misheard that conversation? That in your exhausted state, with your history of trauma and medication and grief, you heard two men discussing funeral logistics and your damaged mind turned it into a murder plot? Aaron looked Caruso straight in the eyes. No, it's not possible, because I know the difference between logistics and murder. I know the difference between grief and guilt, and I know what I heard Marcus Cross say. She's 6 feet under before she can do anything about it. Those words don't have an innocent interpretation, counselor. They have exactly one meaning: bury her alive before she wakes up. And that's exactly what he tried to do. The courtroom was silent. Caruso had no response to that, so he simply said, "No further questions," and returned to his seat. Rachel's redirect was brief. Mr. Cole, do you have any doubt about what you heard that night? None whatsoever. Thank you. No further questions. As Aaron stepped down from the witness stand, his legs shaking from adrenaline and relief, he caught Evelyn's eye. She was crying, but she was also smiling. She mouthed 2 words, "Thank you." Aaron nodded and took his seat in the gallery. He'd done his part. He'd told the truth. Now it was up to 12 strangers to decide if truth mattered more than reasonable doubt. The trial would continue for another week. Expert witnesses on the compound's effects, financial experts showing Marcus's motive, forensic analysis of the prescription records. But the foundation had been laid. Aaron Cole had looked a jury in the eyes and told them about overhearing a murder plot. Dr. Harrison Webb had confessed to his role in it, and Evelyn Cross had survived to see justice pursued. Whether justice would actually be served remained to be seen. The trial stretched into its second week like a storm that wouldn't break. Expert witnesses paraded through the courtroom, each adding another layer to the prosecution's case. Dr. Ellen Zhao, a toxicologist from Johns Hopkins, testified about the compound found in Evelyn's system, a sophisticated blend of benzodiazepines and a rare Eastern European pharmaceutical that slowed metabolic function to near-death levels. She explained in clinical detail how it mimicked death convincingly enough to fool standard medical examination, but would metabolize within 48 to 52 hours, exactly as Aaron had testified he'd heard Marcus say. Could this compound have been administered accidentally? Rachel Kim asked. Absolutely not, Dr. Zhao replied, her voice firm. This is not a medication you stumble upon. It's not FDA approved for use in the United States. It would have to be specially obtained, likely through international pharmaceutical channels or black market sources. And the dosing required to achieve death-like symptoms without actually causing death is incredibly precise. This was administered by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Caruso's cross-examination tried to suggest Evelyn might have taken the compound herself, perhaps a suicide attempt Marcus was trying to cover up to protect her reputation. But Dr. Zhao demolished that theory with ruthless efficiency. Mrs. Cross's medical records show no history of depression, suicidal ideation, or psychiatric treatment of any kind, she stated. Furthermore, the injection site found on her arm was in a location difficult to self-administer. And most critically, if this were a suicide attempt, why would the supposed victim's husband rush to bury her before proper investigation? That's not the behavior of someone trying to save a loved one. That's the behavior of someone trying to hide evidence. The jury took notes furiously. Caruso moved on, but the damage was done. The financial expert Gerald Thompson presented next. He was a forensic accountant who'd spent the last 3 weeks dissecting the Cross family finances with surgical precision. What he found painted a damning picture. Marcus Cross was drowning in debt, Thompson testified, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. He'd made a series of catastrophic investments over the past 2 years. Cryptocurrency speculation that lost $2.3 million. A startup tech company that failed within 6 months, costing him another $1.8 million. Real estate ventures in markets that collapsed. Rachel guided him through the numbers. How much total debt had Mr. Cross accumulated? Approximately $6.7 million, most of it hidden through offshore accounts and shell corporations. Evelyn Cross had no knowledge of these debts. He'd carefully kept them separate from their joint finances. What would have happened if she'd discovered them? Based on their prenuptial agreement, financial fraud, or hiding significant debts would have given her grounds for divorce with no financial settlement to Mr. Cross. He would have walked away from the marriage with nothing while still carrying those debts. And if Evelyn died? Thompson pulled out a chart showing the money trail. Marcus was the primary beneficiary of her life insurance, $200 million. He would have inherited her personal estate, valued at approximately $90 million. And as her widower, he would have had significant influence over her shares in Helix Technologies, worth roughly $3.2 billion. Even if he couldn't directly control the company, he could have sold those shares or leveraged them to eliminate his debts and live comfortably for the rest of his life. So her death would have solved all his financial problems? Completely. He would have gone from bankrupt to billionaire overnight. Caruso fought back hard during cross-examination, suggesting that financial motive didn't equal murder, that lots of people had money problems without killing their spouses, that the prosecution was connecting dots that didn't form a complete picture. But the jury had seen the numbers. They understood that $6.7 million in debt plus $200 million in insurance equaled a very compelling reason to want your wife dead. The prosecution called 18 witnesses over 9 days. Patterson, the funeral director, testified about Marcus's insistence on rapid burial. The cemetery foreman admitted he'd been offered $50,000 to have the grave filled and covered by noon on the funeral day. Unusual, but not illegal, he'd thought at the time. Evelyn's assistant testified about the divorce attorneys Evelyn had been quietly meeting with in the weeks before her collapse. A private investigator revealed that Evelyn had hired him to follow Marcus and had photographic evidence of his affair with a woman named Simone Laurent, a French executive Marcus had met at a tech conference. Each piece of evidence was a nail in Marcus's coffin, and the prosecution hammered them in with methodical precision. But Caruso was a master of his craft, and he wasn't finished fighting. The defense case began on day 10 with character witnesses, colleagues who praised Marcus's business acumen, friends who described him as generous and kind, his elderly mother who wept on the stand while insisting her son could never harm anyone. It was effective theater, painting Marcus as a flawed but fundamentally good man caught in a terrible misunderstanding. Then Caruso called his star witness, Dr. Robert Mendez, a psychiatrist who'd been paid handsomely to review Aaron Cole's medical records and provide his professional opinion. Dr. Mendez was smooth, confident, and utterly convincing as he explained how trauma could create false memories, how PTSD could make sufferers perceive threats where none existed, how grief could manifest as elaborate fantasies designed to give meaning to meaningless loss. In Mr. Cole's case, Mendez testified, "We have a man who lost his daughter to violence he felt powerless to prevent. That kind of trauma creates a psychological need to save others, to rewrite the narrative of helplessness. When he overheard what was likely an ordinary conversation about funeral arrangements, his traumatized mind transformed it into another chance to be the hero he couldn't be for his daughter." Rachel's cross-examination was fierce. "Dr. Mendez, you've never actually examined Mr. Cole, have you?" "No, but I've reviewed his complete medical history and..." "So you're diagnosing a man you've never met, whose trauma you've never personally assessed, based on records that don't include any history of false memories or delusional thinking?" The pattern of trauma response is clear. The pattern of you being paid $30,000 by the defense to create doubt is also clear. "Isn't it, doctor?" Caruso objected. Judge Thornton sustained it, but the jury had heard the number. $30,000 for an expert opinion suddenly seemed less expert and more purchased. The defense rested after 3 days, and closing arguments began on a gray Monday morning with rain hammering against the courtroom windows. The gallery was packed beyond capacity again, the media circus at fever pitch. This was the moment everything had been building toward. Rachel Kim approached the jury box wearing a dark gray suit, her expression somber but determined. She didn't start with theatrics. She started with truth. "Ladies and gentlemen, this case is not complicated. Marcus Cross wanted his wife dead. He had motive, 6.7 million reasons, plus a $200 million insurance payout. He had means, access to a rare pharmaceutical compound and a corrupt doctor willing to administer it. And he had opportunity. He was the husband, the person with easiest access to his wife's food, drink, and medical care. She walked along the jury box, making eye contact with each juror. The defense wants you to believe this is all a tragic medical mistake amplified by a traumatized janitor's imagination. But think about the facts. Dr. Webb confessed. The compound was found in Evelyn's system. The financial records prove Marcus was drowning in debt. Aaron Cole's testimony about what he overheard has been corroborated by every piece of evidence we've presented. And most importantly, Evelyn Cross woke up in a coffin at her own funeral and immediately identified her husband as the person who tried to kill her. Rachel paused, letting that sink in. The defense has thrown everything at Aaron Cole, attacked his mental health, his credibility, his trauma. Why? Because his testimony is the foundation that holds this entire case together. If they can make you doubt him, they can make you doubt everything. But ask yourselves this: what does Aaron Cole gain from lying? He doesn't get money. He doesn't get fame. In fact, he's been harassed by media and had his private grief exposed to the world. He gets nothing except the knowledge that he saved a woman's life. She walked to the evidence table, picking up the photograph of the empty casket. Marcus Cross tried to bury his wife alive. Not in a fit of passion, not in a moment of rage, but with cold, calculated planning. He poisoned her, had her pronounced dead, and rushed her burial so she'd suffocate underground before anyone could discover the truth. The only reason Evelyn Cross is alive today is because one man, a janitor, someone Marcus never thought to worry about, overheard the plot and had the courage to act. Rachel returned to the jury, her voice strengthening. The defense will tell you there's reasonable doubt, but reasonable doubt isn't any doubt. It's doubt based on reason. And there is no reasonable explanation for why Marcus rushed that burial, why he had massive hidden debts that Evelyn's death would erase, why that specific compound was in her system, why Dr. Webb confessed to the entire plot. The only reasonable conclusion is that Marcus Cross is guilty of attempted murder, and it's time he faces justice for trying to kill his wife. She thanked the jury and sat down. The courtroom was silent except for the rain. Vincent Caruso rose slowly, adjusting his tie with practiced precision. He looked tired, genuinely tired, as if this case had worn even his considerable stamina down. It was a good performance, making him seem like a weary truth-teller rather than a hired gun. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice quieter than usual, "I've been doing this for 47 years. I've defended the guilty and the innocent, and I've learned that the truth is rarely as simple as the prosecution wants you to believe." He walked to the center of the courtroom, not approaching the jury yet. Yes, Marcus Cross made mistakes. He had an affair. He admits that. He made bad investments and hid financial problems from his wife. He admits that too. These are the actions of a flawed, frightened man, not a murderer. But the prosecution wants you to believe that financial problems automatically equal homicidal intent. That's not reasonable. That's convenient. Caruso finally approached the jury, his expression grandfatherly and kind. "Let's talk about Aaron Cole. I have tremendous sympathy for what he's been through. Losing a child is unimaginable. But sympathy doesn't equal reliability. The prosecution wants you to believe that a man with documented PTSD, who's experienced auditory hallucinations, who admits to hearing his dead daughter's voice, who works exhausting night shifts, that this man's uncorroborated testimony about a conversation he allegedly overheard through a crack in a door at 1:30 in the morning is absolute truth. Does that sound reasonable to you?" He paused, letting the question hang. Dr. Webb's confession? He's facing life in prison for medical malpractice that killed or nearly killed his patient. Of course he's willing to support any narrative that shifts blame to someone else. His confession isn't corroboration, it's self-preservation. Caruso walked to the defense table, putting his hand on Marcus's shoulder again. The compound in Evelyn's system, Dr. Webb had access to it. He prescribed medications to Evelyn. He could have administered it without Marcus's knowledge. The prosecution asks you to believe Marcus somehow obtained a rare Eastern European pharmaceutical, but they haven't shown you how, when, or where. They have no proof he ever possessed it, only Dr. Webb's word, and we've established why that's unreliable. He turned back to the jury, his voice strengthening. And Evelyn's statement when she woke up? She'd been in a chemical coma for nearly 48 hours. Her cognitive function was compromised. She was disoriented, terrified, and surrounded by chaos. In that moment, she saw her husband and her traumatized mind, influenced by Aaron Cole's shouted accusations, immediately assigned blame. But trauma responses aren't evidence. Fear isn't proof. Caruso walked along the jury box now, matching Rachel's earlier positioning. The prosecution needs you to believe a complicated conspiracy where Marcus somehow obtained a rare drug, convinced his doctor to administer it, timed everything perfectly, and planned to bury his wife alive, all while leaving no physical evidence, no electronic trail, no witnesses except one traumatized janitor. Or, he paused dramatically, you can believe the simpler explanation. A medical tragedy where a doctor made a terrible mistake in judgment, where a patient had an adverse reaction to medication, and where the truth got lost in a perfect storm of trauma, fear, and misunderstanding. He returned to his seat, his voice soft now. My client is not perfect, but imperfect doesn't mean murderer. The prosecution hasn't proved their case beyond a reasonable doubt. They've told you a compelling story and asked you to fill in the gaps. But gaps aren't proof, stories aren't evidence, and reasonable doubt exists in every corner of this case. I trust you'll see that and return the only verdict the evidence supports. Not guilty. The closing arguments concluded just after noon. Judge Thornton gave the jury their instructions, the legal framework for deliberation, the definition of reasonable doubt, the requirement for unanimous verdict. It took 40 minutes, and then the 12 jurors filed out of the courtroom to decide Marcus Cross's fate. The waiting began. Evelyn sat in a private room the court had provided, Claire beside her, Margaret Chen reviewing documents that didn't really need reviewing, just something to keep busy. The first day of deliberation passed with no verdict. That was normal, everyone said. Complex cases took time. Aaron spent the days in a small coffee shop 3 blocks from the courthouse, drinking tea he didn't taste and staring at nothing. Reporters had found him, of course, but he refused all interviews, all requests for statements. He'd said everything that mattered on the witness stand. Rachel Kim and her team stayed in the prosecutor's office, running through the case again and again, second-guessing every decision, wondering if they'd done enough. She'd prosecuted 43 cases and won 41 convictions, but this one felt different. This one mattered in ways that transcended statistics. Marcus sat in his holding cell, probably still believing his money would save him. Probably already planning his post-acquittal press conference where he'd play the wronged husband, the victim of overzealous prosecution. Caruso had likely already drafted it. On the afternoon of the second day, Aaron's phone rang. Detective Park. Jury's back, she said without preamble. They've reached a verdict. Get to the courthouse now. Aaron's hands shook as he paid his bill and walked the 3 blocks through December cold that bit through his jacket. 2 days of deliberation. That could mean anything. Conviction, acquittal, hung jury. No way to know until the foreman spoke. The courtroom filled rapidly, the same overflow crowd as before, the same media frenzy. Marcus was led in wearing a fresh suit, his expression calm and confident. Evelyn entered with Claire and Margaret, her face pale but composed. Aaron took his seat in the gallery, his heart hammering so hard he could feel it in his throat. Judge Thornton entered. All rise. Everyone stood, sat, waited in electric silence as the jury filed in. Aaron tried to read their faces, looking for some clue, but they were blank, professional, giving nothing away. Has the jury reached a verdict? Judge Thornton asked. The foreman stood, a middle-aged woman named Patricia Williams, who worked as an accountant and had sat stone-faced through the entire trial. We have, Your Honor. On the charge of attempted murder in the first degree, how do you find? Patricia Williams looked directly at Marcus Cross, her expression hardening almost imperceptibly. We find the defendant guilty. The courtroom erupted. Gasps, shouts, someone screamed. Marcus's face went white, then red, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly. Caruso's professional mask cracked for just a moment, showing genuine shock. Evelyn collapsed against Claire, sobbing with relief. Margaret squeezed her hand so hard it would leave bruises. Aaron sat frozen, unable to process what he'd just heard. Guilty. They'd believed him. 12 strangers had listened to his testimony and chosen to believe. Judge Thornton gavelled for order. I will have silence in this courtroom or I will clear it. Continue, Madam Foreman. Patricia Williams continued through the remaining charges. Conspiracy to commit murder, guilty. Fraud, guilty. Witness tampering, guilty. Each verdict landed like a hammer blow, and with each one, Marcus seemed to shrink in his chair. The jury is polled and the verdict is recorded, Judge Thornton announced. Mr. Cross, you have been found guilty on all counts. Sentencing will be scheduled for 4 weeks from today. Until then, you will remain in custody without bail. Court is adjourned. Marcus was on his feet immediately, shouting at the jury. You've made a terrible mistake. I'm innocent. I loved my wife. This is a miscarriage of justice. Security had to physically restrain him as he was led from the courtroom, still screaming about appeals and corruption and how his lawyers would overturn this travesty. But the jury had spoken, and their verdict was final. Outside the courthouse, in the December cold, Rachel Kim held a press conference. Cameras flashed, microphones thrust forward, reporters shouting questions over each other. Rachel waited for quiet, then spoke clearly and firmly. Today, justice was served. Marcus Cross tried to murder his wife in one of the most cold-blooded, calculated ways imaginable. He almost succeeded. But because of the bravery of one witness and the diligence of law enforcement, Evelyn Cross is alive, and her would-be murderer is facing the consequences of his actions. What sentence are you seeking? A reporter called out. The maximum allowed by law, 25 years to life. Mr. Cross deserves to spend the rest of his life in prison for what he did. What do you say to critics who claim Aaron Cole's testimony was unreliable? Rachel smiled slightly. The jury disagreed with those critics. Aaron Cole is a hero, plain and simple. He saved a woman's life at great personal cost, and his courage made this conviction possible. Is there a message you want to send to other potential victims of domestic violence? Rachel's expression softened. Yes, your life has value. You deserve safety. And there are people who will fight for you, even people you've never met, like Aaron Cole did for Evelyn Cross. Don't lose hope. Justice is possible. Evelyn gave her own brief statement, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. I want to thank the jury for their service and their verdict. I want to thank the prosecutors, the police, and everyone who worked tirelessly to bring the truth to light. But most of all, I want to thank Aaron Cole. He saved my life when he had no reason to, when it would have been safer to stay silent. His courage gave me a second chance at life, and I will spend the rest of that life making sure his bravery wasn't for nothing. Aaron watched from the edge of the crowd, refusing to approach the microphones. He'd done what he set out to do. The rest was just noise. But Margaret Chen found him anyway, pulling him aside while the media circus continued. Evelyn wants to see you, Margaret said. Tonight, if you're willing. Private dinner, just the three of us, you, her, and me to handle any legal questions. She has a proposal for you. I told her I don't want money, Aaron said. It's not about money, it's about purpose. Will you come? Aaron thought about his empty apartment, his solitary life, the 7 years he'd spent being invisible. And he thought about the last 3 weeks, the terror and triumph, the testimony and verdict, the feeling of mattering again. I'll come, he said. The restaurant was quiet and elegant, a place where privacy was guaranteed and discretion was currency. Evelyn had reserved a private room, and when Aaron arrived, feeling underdressed in his one good shirt and worn jacket, she greeted him with a hug that surprised them both. Thank you, she whispered, for everything. They sat, and for a while they just talked. Not about the trial, not about Marcus, not about the verdict. Just two people getting to know each other beyond the trauma that had brought them together. Evelyn told him about building Helix Technologies from nothing, about the early days when she couldn't afford office space and coded in coffee shops. Aaron told her about his years as a paramedic, the lives he'd saved, the satisfaction of doing work that mattered. I miss it, Aaron admitted. The purpose, the feeling of making a difference. Then come back to it, Evelyn said. Not as a paramedic. I know that ship has sailed. But Aaron, you have 20 years of emergency medical experience. You're excellent at training and teaching. What if you did that? I thought about it. Your lawyer helped me reach out to some community organizations. I've got a few volunteer opportunities lined up. Volunteer is a start, Evelyn said. But I'm thinking bigger. Helix Technologies has expanded into health tech. medical devices, emergency response systems, telemedicine platforms. We're good at technology, but we need people who understand emergency medicine from the ground up. I want to create a new division focused on improving emergency response times and medical training accessibility, and I want you to head it. Aaron stared at her. I'm a janitor. You're a decorated paramedic with 2 decades of experience who saved my life using nothing but observation skills and courage. That's not a janitor. That's exactly the person I need. Margaret stepped in, sliding a folder across the table. The position would be Director of Emergency Medical Training and Development. Salary commensurate with experience, and before you object, this isn't charity. Evelyn's offering you a real job with real responsibilities because you're legitimately qualified. You'd be developing training programs, working with first responders, creating educational materials for emergency medical scenarios. It's work you're equipped to do and work that needs doing. Aaron opened the folder, seeing numbers that made his head spin. A salary that would change his life. Benefits. An office. A purpose. Why? He asked. Why do all this? Because you gave me my life back, Evelyn said simply. And because I watched you on that witness stand, and I saw someone who'd spent 7 years hiding from life because it hurt too much to live it. I've been there, Aaron. These past 3 weeks dealing with the betrayal and the trial and the media, I've wanted to hide too. But hiding doesn't honor what we've survived. Living does. Building does. Creating something meaningful from the ashes does. She leaned forward, her eyes intense. Take the job. Not because you owe me, you don't. Take it because you deserve a second chance the same way I got one. Take it because somewhere out there is another person who needs saving, and your experience and knowledge could make the difference. Take it because you're too valuable to spend the rest of your life being invisible. Aaron felt tears burning in his eyes. For 7 years, he'd been running from life, from feeling, from the risk of caring about anything enough that losing it would hurt. And in 3 weeks, this woman he'd saved had somehow saved him back. I'll take it, he said quietly, on one condition. Name it. The first training program we develop is for recognizing signs of domestic violence and intervening safely. We teach people that staying silent doesn't protect anyone. It just enables abusers. We make sure the next generation of first responders knows that speaking up, even when it's hard, even when it's scary, can save lives. Evelyn's smile was radiant. Deal. We start Monday. They shook hands across the table, sealing more than a business arrangement. This was 2 people choosing to live again, to build something meaningful from tragedy, to prove that survival could become more than just existing. 4 weeks later, Marcus Cross stood before Judge Thornton for sentencing. He'd lost weight in jail, lost the polished veneer that money and privilege had given him. He looked older, smaller, diminished. Evelyn gave a victim impact statement, her voice clear and unwavering as she described the terror of waking in a coffin, the betrayal of discovering her husband had tried to kill her, the long road to trusting anyone again. You took my sense of safety, she told Marcus, looking directly at him. You took my ability to trust. You took years of my life that I'll spend in therapy trying to process what you did. But you didn't take my life itself. Aaron Cole made sure of that. And while you spend the rest of your days in prison, I'll spend mine building something better, a company that helps people, programs that save lives, a future that honors the second chance I was given. Judge Thornton sentenced Marcus Cross to 25 years to life on the attempted murder charge, with additional sentences on the conspiracy and fraud charges to run consecutively. With good behavior, he might be eligible for parole in 40 years. He'd be 93. Dr. Harrison Webb, for his cooperation and testimony, received 12 years with possibility of parole in 8. He'd lost his medical license, his reputation, his freedom. But he'd also found something resembling redemption in the truth. And Aaron Cole, standing in the back of the courtroom one last time, watched justice finally, fully, completely served. Then he walked out of that courthouse and toward his new office at Helix Technologies, where his nameplate read, Director of Emergency Medical Training, and his calendar was already full of meetings about the Domestic Violence Intervention Program. The nightmares still came sometimes. Maya's voice, Sophie's face, the weight of loss that would never fully lift. But now, when Aaron woke in the dark, he had purpose waiting for him in the morning. He had work that mattered. He had a life worth living. And somewhere in the city, Evelyn Cross was rebuilding her empire with new understanding of what truly mattered. Not money, not power, but the courage to trust again, to be vulnerable again, to believe that people could surprise you with goodness even after someone had shown you the depths of evil. 2 lives had been saved that day at the cemetery, one from death, one from despair, and both of them were finally, truly learning to live again. 6 months after the verdict, Aaron stood in front of 47 first responders in a training facility that still smelled of fresh paint and new possibilities. The room was part of Helix Technologies' new Emergency Medical Training Center, a state-of-the-art complex that Evelyn had fast-tracked through development with the kind of determination that had built her empire. These trainees, paramedics, EMTs, firefighters, police officers, had given up their Saturday to attend Aaron's workshop on recognizing and responding to domestic violence situations. "Let me tell you about the biggest mistake I ever made," Aaron began, and the room went silent. He'd learned over the past months that honesty was his most powerful teaching tool. 7 years ago, I responded to 3 separate calls at the same address. A woman with a broken wrist, a concussion, a dislocated shoulder. Each time, her husband explained it away. She fell downstairs. She tripped in the garage. She had a car accident. And each time I filed my report, noted my suspicions, and told myself that someone else would handle it. He paused, letting the weight of that confession settle. That woman's name was Jennifer Fenton. She died 8 weeks after my 3rd call. Her husband killed her, then killed my 16-year-old daughter Maya, who was walking past their house at the wrong time. If I'd pushed harder, if I'd done more than file reports, if I'd been brave enough to make myself uncomfortable by insisting on intervention, 2 women would still be alive. One of the trainees, a young paramedic named Carlos Rivera, raised his hand tentatively. "But you did everything you were supposed to do, right? You reported it. You followed protocol." "I did," Aaron agreed, "and protocol failed. Because protocol assumes someone else will take the next step. It assumes the system works. It assumes that if we just document and move on, justice will somehow happen. But justice doesn't happen automatically. It requires people willing to be uncomfortable, to push beyond the minimum, to care enough to follow through." He clicked to the next slide, showing statistics on domestic violence deaths and the number of times victims had prior contact with emergency services. The numbers were staggering and shameful. "You're going to encounter situations where everything looks fine on the surface," Aaron continued, "where the victim covers for the abuser, where the injuries have plausible explanations, where getting involved seems like more trouble than it's worth. Those are the moments that define whether you're just doing a job or actually saving lives." A veteran firefighter named Susan Chen spoke up. "But we can't force people to leave dangerous situations. We can't make arrests without evidence. What are we supposed to do?" "You do what I should have done," Aaron said. "You document everything in obsessive detail. You give victims resources every single time, even if they refuse them. You build relationships with social workers, domestic violence advocates, and police who specialize in these cases. You make yourself a small but persistent thorn in the abuser's side, letting them know they're being watched. And you never convince yourself that someone else will handle it." He spent the next 3 hours walking them through case studies, intervention strategies, and the subtle signs of abuse that often went unnoticed. When the session ended, Carlos approached him with tears in his eyes. "My sister's in a bad marriage," he said quietly. "I've known for months, but I kept telling myself it wasn't my business, that she's an adult who can make her own choices. After hearing you today, I can't keep pretending. I need to do something." Aaron gave him contact information for 3 domestic violence organizations and a script for having difficult conversations with loved ones in danger. "The hardest part is starting," Aaron told him. "But once you start, you'll find the strength to continue. I promise." After Carlos left, Aaron sat alone in the empty training room, feeling the familiar ache of Maya's absence, but also something new, the sense that his daughter's death might prevent others, that his failure might become someone else's catalyst for action. It didn't erase the grief, but it transformed it into something with purpose. His phone buzzed. A text from Evelyn. "How did the training go?" "Good, really good. One trainee already planning intervention for his sister. That's 1 life potentially saved. Worth it?" Aaron smiled at his phone. Worth everything. Across town, Evelyn sat in her corner office at Helix Technologies, looking out over the city she'd almost never seen again. The company had weathered the scandal better than anyone expected. Her transparency about the attempted murder, her visible determination to build something positive from the trauma, and her zero-tolerance policy for corruption had actually strengthened investor confidence. The stock had recovered fully and was now trading higher than before her near death. David Okonkwo knocked on her open door. Got a minute? The board wants to discuss the new medical division's expansion proposal. Come in, Evelyn said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. David had been her rock through the trial and recovery, running the company with steady competence while she dealt with police, lawyers, and the media circus. She'd made his acting CEO position permanent 3 months ago, restructuring the company so they shared leadership equally. They love the emergency training center, David reported, settling into the chair. Aaron's programs are getting incredible feedback. Fire departments from 3 states have already requested his curriculum, but they're concerned about the cost of expanding to 10 more cities like you proposed. Show them the projections again, Evelyn said. Every dollar we invest in training programs pays back 5-fold in reduced emergency response times, better patient outcomes, and lives saved. This isn't charity, it's smart business that happens to do enormous good. David grinned. That's what I told them. They just wanted to hear it from you directly. Board meeting's Tuesday at 9. After he left, Evelyn returned to the proposal she'd been drafting, a new initiative to provide free emergency medical training to underserved communities, specifically targeting areas where domestic violence rates were highest. Aaron had suggested it, and she'd immediately seen the potential. They'd pilot it in 5 cities, train 500 community members in basic intervention and first aid, and create a network of people equipped to recognize and respond to violence before it turned fatal. Her phone rang. Her therapist, Dr. Patricia Reeves, with whom she had standing appointments twice a week. Evelyn, I have to reschedule our Thursday session, Dr. Reeves said. Family emergency. Can we move to Friday morning? Of course. Everything okay? It will be. How are you doing? Any nightmares this week? Evelyn considered. The nightmares had been relentless in the first months after the trial. Dreams of suffocating in coffins, of Marcus's face above her, of waking to find the trial had been the dream, and she was still being lowered into the ground. But they'd gradually decreased in frequency and intensity. 2 this week, she admitted, down from 5 last week. Progress. Definite progress. Keep up with the breathing exercises. And Evelyn? Remember that healing isn't linear. Bad weeks don't erase good ones. After the call ended, Evelyn sat with that truth. Healing wasn't linear. Some days she felt strong and capable, ready to conquer the world. Other days, a car backfiring or a stranger's cologne smelling like Marcus's could send her into panic attacks that left her gasping and shaking. But the good days were starting to outnumber the bad, and that had to count for something. Her younger sister Claire appeared in the doorway, arms full of takeout bags. Lunch is here. And before you say you're too busy, I'm invoking sister privilege. You need to eat actual food, not just coffee. Evelyn laughed, the sound still surprising her sometimes. Laughter had felt impossible in those first weeks after the funeral that wasn't. Now it came more easily, more often. They ate together in Evelyn's office, talking about Claire's work at the Seattle Botanical Gardens, about their mother's upcoming visit, about everything except trials and murder attempts and trauma. These normal conversations were healing in their own way, reminding Evelyn that life could be ordinary and beautiful again. Have you thought about dating? Claire asked suddenly, then winced. Sorry, that was too direct. Forget I asked. No, it's okay, Evelyn said slowly. I've thought about it. My therapist says I should consider it when I'm ready, but the idea of trusting someone that intimately again, it terrifies me. Marcus was supposed to love me, and he tried to bury me alive. How do I trust my own judgment after being that catastrophically wrong about someone? Claire reached across the desk and took her hand. You weren't wrong about him. He was wrong about his own character. There's a difference. And when you're ready, not today, maybe not this year, but someday, you'll find that your judgment is fine. You'll just choose more carefully, with eyes wide open to red flags you might have missed before. Maybe, Evelyn said. Right now I'm focusing on the company, on the training programs, on building something that matters. Romance can wait. As long as you're living, not just existing, Claire said. That's all I want for you. That evening, Aaron sat in his new apartment, a two-bedroom place he'd rented 3 months ago when the studio had started feeling less like safety and more like a cage. The second bedroom was set up as an office, filled with medical textbooks, training materials, and a wall covered in thank you notes from people who'd attended his workshops. He was reviewing curriculum for next month's advanced training when his phone rang, an unknown number which he normally wouldn't answer, but something made him pick up. "Is this Aaron Cole?" A woman's voice, hesitant and strained. "Yes." "Who's calling?" "My name is Jennifer Martinez. You don't know me, but my brother Carlos took your training last weekend, the domestic violence intervention workshop." Aaron's attention sharpened. "Is everything all right?" "Because of what you taught him, because of the resources you provided. He convinced me to leave my husband. I'm at a shelter now with my 2 kids. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, but Carlos made me understand that staying was teaching my children that love means accepting violence, that I deserved better, that they deserved better." Aaron felt emotion tighten his throat. "I'm so glad you got out safely. I just wanted to thank you. Carlos said you lost your daughter because someone didn't intervene in time. I'm so sorry for your loss, but I want you to know because you turned your grief into action, because you taught my brother how to help me. My kids still have their mother. That's your daughter's legacy, Mr. Cole. Live saved because of the life you lost." After Jennifer hung up, Aaron sat in the quiet of his apartment and cried. Not the bitter, rage-filled tears of the past 7 years, but something cleaner, grief mixed with purpose. Loss transformed into meaning. Maya was still gone. Sophie was still gone. That would never stop hurting, but their deaths had sparked something in him that was now saving others, and maybe that was the only redemption available in a senseless world. His phone buzzed again. This time, Evelyn. "Did you get the email about the Denver expansion? The fire chief there wants your full training program for all their emergency personnel." "Just saw it. That's 200 more people trained. 200 more chances to intervene before violence becomes fatal. We're making a difference, Aaron. Real, measurable difference." "We are," he agreed. "Thank you for giving me this chance, for seeing past the janitor to the paramedic I used to be. Thank you for saving my life and then teaching me how to live it again. Dinner next week? I want to discuss the community outreach proposal with you." "It's a date," Aaron said, then immediately felt awkward. "I mean, not a date, a work dinner, a professional—" Evelyn laughed and the sound was warm and genuine. "I know what you meant. 7 p.m. at Marino's. And Aaron, you can stop being nervous around me. We're friends. That's allowed." Friends. The word felt foreign but also comforting. Aaron had isolated himself for so long that friendship seemed like a luxury he didn't deserve. But maybe Evelyn was right. Maybe they'd both earned the right to connection, to trust, to building something beyond survival. 3 months later, Aaron stood in his mother's garden in Ohio, visiting for the first time in 2 years. He'd avoided family gatherings, unable to face their pity and his own shame at how far he'd fallen. But his mother had called after seeing news coverage of the trial, had told him she was proud of him, had begged him to come home even just for a weekend. The garden was overgrown but beautiful, wild roses climbing trellises and flowering plants in riotous abundance. His mother appeared with tea, her hair grayer than he remembered, her smile the same. "Sophie would have loved this," she said softly, gesturing at the garden. "She had such a gift with growing things." "She did," Aaron agreed. It was the first time in 7 years he'd been able to talk about Sophie without feeling like he was drowning. "What you're doing now," his mother continued, "this training program, helping people. Sophie would be so proud. Maya, too. They'd want you living like this, purposefully, helpfully, not hiding in grief." "I wasted 7 years," Aaron said quietly. "No, you spent 7 years healing badly, which is different from wasting. And when the moment came, when Evelyn Cross needed someone to see her and act, you were ready. Maybe you couldn't have been that person without those 7 years of understanding loss." His mother squeezed his hand. "Everything that breaks us also teaches us, if we let it. You let it, Aaron. Finally." They spent the weekend talking about Maya's childhood, Sophie's quirks, the good years before tragedy struck. It hurt, but it also felt like lancing a wound that had festered too long. The pain was cleaner now, more honest. On his last morning there, Aaron visited the cemetery where Sophie and Maya were buried. He'd avoided it for 7 years, unable to face the physical proof of what he'd lost. But now he stood before their shared headstone and spoke to them as if they could hear. "I'm sorry it took me so long he said. "Sorry I wasted years being half alive. But I'm trying now. I'm helping people, saving lives when I can, teaching others to be braver than I was. I hope that matters. I hope wherever you are, you can see that I'm finally becoming someone you'd be proud of again." The wind rustled through the trees, and Aaron chose to interpret it as approval. Whether the universe worked that way or not, he needed to believe that his family knew he was trying, that their deaths weren't meaningless, that love persisted somehow beyond loss. Back in the city, Evelyn faced her own reckoning. She'd filed for divorce from Marcus immediately after his conviction. Technically still married to a man serving life in prison created legal complications she didn't need. The divorce was finalized in absentia, Marcus refusing to participate from his prison cell. She reclaimed her maiden name, Chambers, though most people still knew her as Cross. That was fine. She'd built the Cross name into something powerful, and Marcus's crimes couldn't erase her achievements. Her lawyers had suggested she sell the house she'd shared with Marcus, but Evelyn had a different idea. She donated it to a nonprofit organization that provided housing for domestic violence survivors, complete with security systems, legal resources, and counseling services. The irony was intentional. The house where Marcus had plotted her murder would now shelter women escaping men like him. The media coverage of the donation was overwhelmingly positive, but Evelyn didn't do it for publicity. She did it because the house held nothing but painful memories, and transforming it into a space of healing felt like reclaiming power Marcus had tried to take. A year after the funeral that wasn't, Evelyn and Aaron met for dinner at their usual restaurant. It had become a monthly tradition, checking in with each other, discussing the training programs, and slowly building a friendship that defied easy categorization. They'd saved each other's lives in different ways, and that created a bond that was deeper than romance, but more intimate than mere friendship. The community outreach program graduated its first class yesterday, Aaron told her, showing her photos on his phone. 87 people from underserved neighborhoods now trained in emergency intervention and domestic violence recognition. One of them, a woman named Keisha Washington, already used her training to help a neighbor escape an abusive situation. "That's incredible," Evelyn said, genuinely moved. 87 people who can each save multiple lives over the course of their lifetimes. The ripple effect is exponential. "It's what you funded," Aaron reminded her. "None of this happens without your vision and resources. And none of it happens without your expertise and passion. We're partners in this, Aaron, equal partners." They ordered dinner and talked about expansion plans, funding proposals, and the possibility of creating a national training network. The conversation flowed easily. Two people who'd learned to trust each other completely because they'd been tested in the most extreme circumstances possible. "Can I ask you something personal?" Aaron said as dessert arrived. "Always." "Do you ever regret it? Hiring me, building this whole division around emergency training, tying your company to the story of your near murder. It would have been easier to just move on quietly." Evelyn considered the question seriously. "I regret marrying Marcus. I regret not seeing the signs earlier. I regret the fear and trauma that still wake me up some nights. But this?" She gestured between them, encompassing the training programs, the lives saved, the purpose they'd built. "This I don't regret at all. You gave me a reason to keep living when survival alone wasn't enough. This work, these programs, the people we're helping, it transforms trauma into meaning, and that's the only way I know how to heal." "Me too," Aaron said quietly. "For 7 years, I just survived. Now I'm finally living again. And it's terrifying and beautiful and worth it." They raised their glasses in a toast. "To living," Evelyn said. "To living," Aaron echoed. 2 years after that November funeral, both Aaron and Evelyn stood on a stage at the National Emergency Services Conference in Chicago. They'd been invited to present their training model and discuss the impact it had achieved. The auditorium was packed with firefighters, paramedics, police officers, and emergency management professionals from across the country. Evelyn spoke first, telling the story with the practiced ease of someone who'd learned to own her narrative rather than be defined by it. She described the murder attempt without flinching, the betrayal without breaking, the recovery as an ongoing journey rather than a destination reached. "I survived because one person refused to stay silent," she said, gesturing to Aaron. "And we built this program because silence kills. Every day someone sees something that troubles them and chooses not to act, chooses to believe it's not their business, or that someone else will handle it, or that getting involved will cause more problems than it solves. And every day, people die because of that silence." Aaron took over, walking the audience through the statistics, the training methodology, and the measurable outcomes. In 2 years, their programs had trained over 3,000 emergency responders and community members. Documented interventions had saved at least 47 lives, 47 Jennifer Martinez's who'd escaped dangerous situations because someone had the training and courage to help. "These aren't just numbers," Aaron said, his voice carrying through the auditorium. "Each one is a person who goes home safe, children who still have a parent, families that remain intact. Each one is a life that matters, saved because we decided that silence was no longer acceptable." During the question and answer session, a veteran firefighter raised his hand. "I've been doing this job for 28 years. I've responded to hundreds of domestic calls. But your training showed me things I'd been missing, patterns I'd been ignoring. 3 months after taking your workshop, I helped a woman escape a situation that would have killed her within the week. She's safe now, rebuilding her life. I just wanted to say thank you for teaching an old dog new tricks." The audience applauded. More hands went up, more stories were shared, more lives saved because people had learned to see and act. After the conference, as they waited for their flights home, Evelyn and Aaron sat in the airport lounge reflecting on how far they'd come. "Do you ever wonder what your life would be like if I'd actually died that day?" Evelyn asked. "Every day," Aaron admitted. "I think about the guilt I'd carry, knowing I'd overheard the plot and failed to stop it. I think about how that would have destroyed me completely, how I'd never have recovered from another preventable death. And I think about suffocating underground, about Marcus getting away with it, about all the work we're doing now never happening. It's strange. The worst thing that ever happened to me also led to some of the best things. The programs we've built, the lives we've saved, this friendship we have. None of it exists without that terrible day. Trauma can destroy us or transform us," Aaron said. "Sometimes both. The key is choosing which one defines the story." Evelyn smiled. "We chose well then." 3 years after the funeral, Evelyn received a letter forwarded from her lawyer. It was from Marcus, his first attempt at communication since the conviction. Her hands shook as she opened it, unsure what to expect. The letter was brief, no apology, no acceptance of responsibility, just a rambling justification about financial pressure and bad decisions and how he'd never intended for things to go that far. He suggested that with good behavior, he might be eligible for parole in 37 years, and perhaps then they could talk about what really happened. Evelyn read it once, felt the old anger rise and crest and gradually subside, then filed it away without responding. Marcus didn't deserve her energy, her anger, or her forgiveness. He deserved exactly what he'd gotten, consequences and obscurity. She texted Aaron, "Got a letter from Marcus. First contact since conviction. I'm okay." His response came immediately. "Want to talk?" "No need, just wanted someone to know. The old me would have spiraled, the new me just files it and moves on." "That's growth. Proud of you." Evelyn smiled at her phone, grateful for a friendship that had become foundational to her healing. Aaron understood trauma in ways her therapist, her sister, even her closest friends couldn't. He'd walked through his own fire and emerged scarred but stronger. And his presence reminded her that survival was possible, that meaning could be built from ashes. 5 years after that November day, Aaron stood in Sophie's garden for the first time since her death. His mother had maintained it, but she was getting older, struggling with the physical demands. Aaron had finally felt ready to return, to tend the roses Sophie had loved, to transform the space from a shrine of grief into a living memorial. He pruned the overgrown roses, planted new flowers, repaired the trellises. Physical labor that was meditative and healing, connecting him to his wife's memory without drowning in loss. As he worked, he talked to her. I'm doing okay, Soph. Better than okay, actually. I've got work that matters, friends who care, purpose that ggets me up in the morning. I still miss you every day. Miss Maya every second, but I'm living now, really living, and I think you'd be happy about that. The roses bloomed under his care, pink and vibrant and beautiful. He took photos and sent them to Evelyn, who responded with heart emojis and a message. Sophie's legacy lives on, just like Maya's lives on, and every person your training saves. That summer, Aaron met someone. Her name was Rachel Nguyen, a trauma counselor who'd attended one of his workshops and stayed after to discuss collaboration between their organizations. They got coffee to talk about work, then dinner, then found themselves on a third, not quite date that definitely felt like a date. I should tell you up front, Aaron said over pasta. I lost my wife and daughter 7 years ago. I've done a lot of healing, but I still carry that grief. It's part of who I am. Rachel met his eyes steadily. I work with trauma survivors every day. I understand that grief doesn't disappear. It just becomes part of your story. And Aaron, your story includes incredible courage and growth. That's what I see when I look at you. They took things slowly, both of them cautious about rushing into intimacy after their respective traumas. But over months, something gentle and genuine grew between them. It wasn't the passionate whirlwind Aaron had experienced with Sophie in their 20s. It was something quieter, more intentional, built on mutual respect and shared purpose. When Aaron introduced Rachel to Evelyn over dinner 6 months into the relationship, Evelyn approved immediately. You're good for him, she told Rachel directly. He spent too many years alone, punishing himself for things that weren't his fault. You're helping him remember he deserves happiness. He saved your life, Rachel said. That takes someone extraordinary. We saved each other, Evelyn corrected. That's what the best relationships do. They're reciprocal rescue operations where both people emerge stronger. 7 years after the funeral that wasn't, Evelyn stood in a different cemetery on a bright May morning. This time she was burying her mother, who'd passed peacefully at 82 after a life well lived. It was a real funeral this time, one that honored an actual death rather than a manufactured one. Aaron attended, sitting quietly in the back with Rachel. Afterward, as mourners gathered at the reception, he approached Evelyn. I know this is hard, he said simply, but this is what funerals are supposed to be, celebrating a life completed, not mourning one stolen. She was so proud of what we built, Evelyn said, her voice thick with tears. The training programs, the lives saved. She told me that surviving my own funeral gave me perspective most people never get, the chance to see what mattered before it was too late. She said I used that gift wisely. You did. You do. And she was right to be proud. They stood together watching mourners share stories of Evelyn's mother, her kindness, her strength, her unwavering support of her daughters. It was a life celebrated properly, honored fully, mourned genuinely. The contrast to that other funeral 7 years ago couldn't have been sharper. As the reception wound down, Evelyn pulled Aaron aside. I've been thinking about expanding the training programs internationally. London first, then Tokyo, then Sydney. I want our model replicated globally, saving lives on every continent. Are you in? Aaron didn't hesitate. Absolutely. Let's save the world, one training session at a time. They shook hands, then laughed at the formality and hugged instead. Two people who'd faced death, one literally, one spiritually, and chosen to build something meaningful from the experience. Two people who'd found purpose in the darkest places and light in unexpected friendships. 10 years after Aaron Cole stopped Evelyn Cross's funeral and saved her life, they stood together at the opening of the 100th Emergency Medical Training Center, this one in Mumbai. The program had expanded beyond anything they'd imagined, training tens of thousands of first responders and community members across 6 continents. The measurable impact was staggering. Over 2,000 documented lives saved through intervention, countless more through improved emergency response. During the ribbon-cutting ceremony, a reporter asked Evelyn the inevitable question. Do you ever think about that day at the cemetery? About how close you came to dying? Evelyn smiled, comfortable with the question, after a decade of answering it. Every day, but not with fear anymore, with gratitude. That day taught me that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they choose courage over convenience. Aaron was supposed to be invisible, just a janitor nobody noticed. But he saw what others missed, heard what others ignored, and acted when it would have been safer to stay silent. That's the lesson we've built this entire program around. Everyone has the power to save lives if they're willing to be brave. The reporter turned to Aaron. And you, Mr. Cole? Any regrets about that decision? Aaron thought about Maya and Sophie, about the 7 years he'd spent drowning in grief, about the life he'd built in the decades since. He thought about Rachel, now his wife of 3 years, and the foster son they'd recently welcomed into their home, a teenager who'd lost his own family to violence and needed adults who understood trauma. He thought about the thousands of people alive today because he'd stopped staying silent. No regrets, Aaron said firmly. That day I had a choice, be the man I'd been, paralyzed by past failures, or be someone different, someone braver. I chose brave, and that choice gave me my life back just as surely as it saved Evelyn's. They cut the ribbon together, and the crowd applauded. The Mumbai Training Center opened its doors, ready to teach another generation of first responders that silence kills and courage saves. That evening, at a dinner celebrating the opening, Evelyn raised her glass for a toast. The room quieted as she stood, looking around at the faces gathered. Aaron and Rachel, local emergency services leadership, nonprofit partners, community advocates who'd made this expansion possible. 10 years ago, my husband tried to bury me alive, she began, her voice clear and steady. He failed because one person refused to accept that my death was inevitable. One person chose to see, to listen, to act. That decision created ripples that are still spreading, training programs in 100 cities, thousands of lives saved, a model being replicated worldwide. All because Aaron Cole decided that courage mattered more than safety. She turned to Aaron directly. You gave me a second chance at life. I've tried to honor that gift by building something that multiplies it, giving countless others their own second chances, their own opportunities to escape violence and death. But the real gift wasn't just survival. It was learning how to live again, purposefully and fully, with intention and meaning. Thank you for that. Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible to everyone else, for fighting for me when it would have been easier to walk away, for teaching me that trauma can be transformed into purpose. Aaron stood, raising his own glass. To living, he said simply, echoing the toast they'd made so many years ago. To living, the room responded in chorus. As the celebration continued around them, Evelyn and Aaron stepped out onto the balcony overlooking Mumbai's glittering cityscape, a decade of friendship, of shared purpose, of building something meaningful from the ashes of trauma. Do you ever wonder what comes next? Evelyn asked. We've accomplished so much. Sometimes I worry we've peaked, that everything from here is just maintaining what we've built. Then we build something new, Aaron said. We find the next problem that needs solving, the next lives that need saving. That's what we do. We see what others miss, and we act. That doesn't stop just because we've already succeeded. Evelyn nodded, already thinking about mental health initiatives for emergency responders, about expanding training to include suicide prevention and addiction intervention, about all the ways their model could adapt and grow. Together? She asked. Always, Aaron confirmed. They stood in comfortable silence, two people who'd been pulled back from different types of graves and had chosen to spend their second chances lifting others toward light. The work would continue. Lives would be saved. And somewhere, in a cemetery that almost became Evelyn's tomb, grave plot 447 remained empty, a testament to the power of one person's courage to change everything. 10 years, 100 training centers, thousands of lives saved, and two people who'd learned that the opposite of death wasn't just survival. It was living with purpose, with intention, with the absolute conviction that choosing courage over silence could change the world, one saved life at a time. The janitor who became a hero. The billionaire who became an advocate. Together, they'd prove that even when the world tries to bury the truth, even when darkness seems inevitable, even when staying silent seems safer, courage can bring light back to the surface. And that light, once kindled, spreads in ways no one can predict or contain. It spreads through training sessions and interventions, through lives saved and families preserved, through a global network of people who learn to see, to listen, to act. Aaron Cole had stopped one funeral 10 years ago. In doing so, he'd sparked a movement that would prevent thousands more. That was his daughter's legacy, his wife's memorial, and his own redemption, all woven together in a story that began with a coffin and ended with countless lives lived instead of lost. The best stories, Aaron had learned, weren't the ones where heroes never fell. They were the ones where broken people found the courage to rise again, to transform their pain into purpose, and to build something beautiful from the ruins of what they'd lost. This was that story, and it was far from over.